That's it, folks. The show is over. The Alex and Oliver train has reached its final destination. It is Wednesday, January 7th. It is the end of our CES journey for myself and Alexander Battaglia. But I think we had a pretty good time, and we actually have today an opportunity to round up some of our greatest finds, greatest treasures, greatest roadshow oldies, great finds here from CES, in particular from the booth of Venetian and from the Las Vegas Convention Center.
Yeah, a lot of stuff we saw covering from Intel, AMD, all the different GPU, CPU, PC hardware, extraneous paraphernalia stuff you can see, including robots at CES. There's a lot of talk about today.
Yeah. So Alex, it's very late in the evening here. It's about 11 p.m. PST, aka about Alex's early morning waking time in Germany, where he will be shortly. So I think we should probably just plow into the announcements.
Let's
here.
do it.
Actually, there were 3 vendors who did not actually have that much of a CES presence, but they are the key players in the PC hardware industry. So I feel like we should talk about them off the start. And of course, that's Nvidia, Intel, and AMD.
Let's do it.
Big 3, as it were, of PC chip making. And fortunately for us, for Nvidia, we actually had an opportunity to take a look at some of their products on January 5th, take a look at some of their new offerings on January 5th, and we obviously covered that in an existing video, so perhaps we should just go over that quickly and perhaps offer a little bit of a revision and a rejoinder to some of our coverage on Monday. And on Monday, of course, we saw DLSS 4.5, we saw DLSS 4.5 dynamic multi-frame generation, we saw RTX Remix Logic, we saw G-Sync Pulsar, we also saw path traced Pragmata, and we saw some local AI advancements in some interesting applications. And I think those were generally well received, Alex. I think that people have taken generally a liking to those developments, especially now that DLSS 4.5 is actually in the market.
Yeah, right.
But there are some details surrounding DLSS 4.5 that I do think we need to touch on at the moment, potentially that came from Nvidia.
Yeah, basically, when DLSS has any sort of revision, there's an update to the developer documentation because they publish it on GitHub more or less. You can download the SDK. We don't have currently testing from ourselves to confirm anything about performance or image quality beyond what we saw at the initial kind of hands-on, hands-off stuff, which was, I said very positive things about it because it did look positive in that short viewing, but I still have to do some sort of review video about it. Yeah. But the main thing right now that I did touch on back then was originally, I quoted like a number like 2 to 3% about the cost of it over the K model on like Blackwell GPUs, and that isn't actually the case. Like at 4K, if you go from like the M model to the K model, there is about a little less than 1 millisecond difference on an RTX 5070. Okay. That is, the new M model is almost 1 millisecond heavier at 4K DLSS performance mode on an RTX 5070. So on Blackwell, it's a bit heavier, but 1 millisecond at 4K is actually not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, depending upon quality differences. Which I'm going to have to be looking at more specifically in a dedicated video. But a lot of things that people have been seeing online, and something that I also hinted at that I thought would be the case in that video, but didn't have any direct testing or numbers for it, was just the fact on Ampere and Turing GPUs, it is actually quite a bit heavier. If you look here, they have numbers here from that DLSS SDK documentation on an RTX 3080 Ti. The K model, as well as the J model at 4K, is roughly 2.06 milliseconds. The M model there is 4.35 milliseconds. So it is more than 2x the cost, which would be pretty expensive. But you go over to a 4070 Ti, which is similar performance, I would say, on average. There, the K model at 4K is 1.97 milliseconds, so just a little bit under that of the RTX 3080 Ti. But the M model is 2.74 milliseconds, so it is less than, like I quoted earlier, essentially less than a millisecond heavier. So it is quite a lot more expensive on Ampere, and also it's going to be the same on Turing. Mainly because the acceleration that it's going to be using stuff like maybe like quantized FP4, FP8, it's going to be using accelerants that Ada Lovelace and Blackwell brought to the table that are just not in the tensor cores there in Ampere and Turing. In the past, it's not that surprising that better anti-aliasing costs more, but positives of this are, of course, that you can always turn to a different model preset, which I'll be covering in videos, as well as you can just not use it.
Right. Yeah. So I think that basically the story here is NVIDIA is continuing to support their older architectures, including Turing. I think that's a positive sign in general. I think that's quite positive. But of course, those newer DLSS variants do have some performance penalty on those architectures. Obviously, we saw that with DLSS 4, but it just seems like ever much more pronounced in this case. So I think people should, in general, have options here, probably within games. Probably not be defaulting to DLSS 4.5 necessarily by default with every new release, at least until there's some broad spectrum of permeation across the market.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too, as well as quality stuff. Like in the little preview event we saw, we looked at only basically 2 to 3 titles in total with it. It was very limited in a very limited scenario. We had control of the camera and whatnot, but it doesn't represent all game scenarios. And people have been talking about the fact that there could be quality regressions in certain areas. That's not a surprise. We've seen stuff like that before with machine learning models. So if that is the case, these are things that
test that.
I still have to test it. So that's like stuff that I'll cover in a DLSS 4.5 super resolution video when I get back to Berlin.
Yes. Well, that's very good. I'm sure we all highly appreciate Alex's investigations into image quality with these upscalers, obviously. Yeah, very, very good stuff. Okay, so moving on to AMD from Nvidia. Nvidia also had, of course, the key centerpiece of their announcements was Jensen, and he had some AI announcements, but of course that's of somewhat less interest to us. But AMD had some interesting consumer announcements. I would say it was a little bit lighter in terms of consumer announcements.
I would say so too.
So just running through those announcements really quickly, we have the Ryzen 9850X3D. Very exciting offering here potentially. Plus 400 megahertz basically in the boost clock. So we go from 5.2 gigahertz to 5.6 gigahertz, which is about an 8% gain. They're quoting a small performance uplift on the order of single-digit percentages, of course, not too exciting. Same everything else, including TDP, so it still has 120 watt TDP, I believe. The best just got better, but not by much. So
it's one of those things that we're going to have to look at when the product comes around. But it's just like when you having that extra 3dV cache on the 2 separate CCDs, the question is whether or not that is a big thing for games. And it may not be the case, which is kind of what they hint at.
And as a bit of a visual aid here, you'll have to take our word for it, or rather AMD's word for it, but they did show off a system running running this processor. It was, of course, hidden by a quite interesting wrapped around OLED panel. We saw plenty of those at the show floor, of course. So but yeah, they did have a couple of PCs actually at their booth running this chip, so that's pretty cool. There's also nothing new to report on FSR Redstone, unfortunately. AMD also launched some new Strix Halo variants. So we have the AI Max Plus 392 and the AI Max Plus 388. And the key concession there relative to the full-on AI Max Plus 395 is that we're dealing with reduced configurations in the CPU. So instead of 2 CCDs with a full 8 cores in that maximum configuration, we only have 12 cores, so I presume 6 cores in both CCDs, and a 1 8-core CCD on that lower end variant. But both have 40 CUs. So what is this perfect for? Gaming handhelds.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. The only thing that bothers me about this, and I mentioned this in our hardware of the year video, is that we are still not seeing later RDNA, like RDNA 4. I would have loved to have seen that, but this is not what it's going to be anymore. We just got to wait for that stuff.
And another product that Alex will take the exact same issue with is the Gorgon Point refresh. So Gorgon Point is Strix Point plus, 100 megahertz, 200 megahertz here, there, CPU, GPU, etc. We're used to seeing that from refreshes. And up to 8,533 megatransfers per second LPDDR5X, which I think is up from 8,000 in the previous Strix Point product. So that's not too exciting. They also announced, of course, in classic CES 2026 fashion, we saw some announcements of some AI and data center products, including the Helios server system. Very big, very imposing, very kind of vintage looking, scary looking, maybe almost Dead Space remake kind of vibes there.
It's got that like ribbed look to it.
Ribbed.
Yeah, the AMD,
Ribbed for our displeasure.
yeah, it was a huge. AMD's booth this year was actually a bit more diverse than it has been in years past, actually, because they are focusing more on enterprise and AI, and also that was a big part of the presentation. But they had stuff like biomedical research, health research, recommending my favorite coffee with AI. They have all that kind of stuff. But a diverse booth, but there was a little small gaming section that we're going to talk about a little bit later in the video here with regards to a very specific title.
Exactly. Moving on to the third of the big three, Intel. Somewhat beleaguered in recent years, but actually they have a cool new product, which is Panther Lake, aka Core Ultra 3. It's an exciting new chiplet-based chip with a fast new iGPU, which I believe is manufactured on TSMC N3E. Quite a nice iGPU there, comparable to a mobile RTX 4050, according to their measurements, which we'll have to, of course, test in some more detail. That's a very exciting product. Laptops are coming out soon with that chip, and handhelds are reportedly coming out later in 2026. That's very cool. And actually, Alex and I had the opportunity to sit down and actually play with that chip. I think we want to save some of our more detailed impressions for a future upcoming piece. We also sat down with Tom Peterson at Intel. But do you have any thoughts on the kind of Panther Lake chipset so far?
Panther Lake so far does seem like a great advancement in regards to power, and we're going to have to test it out in comparison to other devices to see how it compares across, for example, to AMD products in the same portfolio size. Another thing that we noticed is that XeSS 3 frame generation, at least at first impressions on a mobile system, was rather compelling. The frame gen did look pretty great. We were seeing great smoothness and great FPS there.
Very responsive.
Very responsive. And also, one thing to really take away from this was that Intel is showing a great level of confidence with these products. Usually, when you go to an event, you're not expected to allow to be recording things and doing a performance capture. And we did straight performance capture of a...
we could even use our own games.
We could use our own games. We could pretty much bench these GPUs in the Panther Lake system as to our desire on these laptops here. And that's something you don't pretty much get anywhere ever. And that speaks to a level of confidence that Intel has regarding this. And I think it's going to bode very well for future products, specifically handhelds, which I'm arguably more interested in right now than a laptop. But with that being said, I'm still very curious about how the laptop performs, which we will be covering hopefully in a future video at some point.
And the CPU chiplet on that is actually manufactured on Intel's brand new 2nm class 18A process.
Yeah, right.
Brand new, really, really exciting from Intel.
Yeah, we basically just need the world to not only be reliant on TSMC, regardless of Panther Lake. Like, we really need competition there, and I'm happy that 18A looks, at least based upon our first impressions here, to be producing viable products like Panther Lake.
Yeah, Panther Lake is 4 chiplets, 1 package, got a lot of cool stuff in it. But moving on, we also got XeSS 3 with multi-frame generation. I think we talked about that, but importantly, that also works across all ARC generations of GPUs. So you do not need the brand new Panther Lake to achieve that.
So it'll be going back to the original ARC, the Battle Mage, presumably big Battle Mage in the future.
Right.
But we also saw it running on the 12 EU version of the Battle Mage spec'd GPU within the highest end Panther Lake.
Yeah. And as one fun note on Intel, there were some rumors floating around pre-CES that we would see an Arrow Lake refresh. I don't believe there's an Arrow Lake refresh, at least no one that was announced at CES. There certainly was not. We would not expect much from an Arrow Lake refresh. I did not actually expect much from Arrow Lake in the first place. It was not the greatest architecture. There's also no Nova Lake tease. So Nova Lake is Intel's basically desktop answer, desktop rejoinder to Panther Lake. It's coming out later in the year. It also is chiplet based, and it has a CPU die manufactured on Intel's 18A process. But we'll see that out later in the year, I believe, late this year. And
I imagine so.
Yeah, that should be an interesting product. I wonder, I think it'll probably be quite good in the HPC segment, in productivity. Remains to be seen exactly how well it will do in gaming, especially if there's no massive L3 cache or something.
Yeah, I know. That's the whole thing about how do you bring that competition to AMD?
Yeah.
We're gonna be able to measure with Panther Lake's laptop variant how much better it is core on core, gen on gen at the same power level, and that'll give us some expectations. But it needs potentially extra sauce to be bringing that competition to AMD, which we don't know yet, right?
Yeah. So we'll have to see about that. But Alex, I think we've exhausted
the big three.
The big three are really exciting. And I think it's important to really focus on the big three here because the big three are what drive the entire rest of the PC industry, right? Totally. So last year, Alex, we saw Blackwell. Blackwell was a huge launch. And you know what Blackwell meant? It meant new laptops from every single vendor, new desktops from every single vendor, new designs from every single OEM, ODM, whatever, new GPUs, new coolers, new everything, okay? That meant the whole kit and caboodle. It meant the entire industry was willing to offer refresh parts, even though Blackwell did not end up actually being that spectacular of a gen-on-gen refresh for many GPUs, at least outside of the high end, of course, and outside of obviously Nvidia's multi-frame generation, which has recently been expanded and extended. But yeah, so that kind of follows into our next topic, which is the PC hardware. So the laptops, the desktops, the handhelds, even the accessories, right? But not the displays. We'll touch on the displays shortly.
A little bit later.
A little bit later. No spoilers there. But I think we had kind of two major vendors we wanted to touch on because they were the vendors that we spent, I think, the most time with, and they had some interesting people there to explain the products. And I think they're kind of two of the higher end vendors as well, which I think gives them a little bit of panache here to talk about them. So we stopped by the Alienware booth, the Dell booth, and they showed us the Alienware 18 Area 51, which is their 18-inch, their flagship gaming laptop. So it has an interesting chassis design with windowed underside, so you can see the fans there glowing in the casing. That's a pretty cool design. It's also counterposed with a mesh topside where you can see the fans a little bit and where they actually get airflow for the fans, because obviously that's something that you do need. It's got a full RGB trackpad. It's got an RGB light strip, quite subtle, they noted, but a quite nice RGB light strip around the hinge area. And it's kind of reminiscent of older designs. I would say it's a semi-professional, semi-gamer design. It's trying to blend into both elements there. It's a good balance between professional and the kind of gamer style.
Yeah, it's not, well, the one thing that I actually did like about it, it wasn't super angular and wasn't ultra aggressive in those aspects. And if you are used to the older Alienware designs, it does lean a little bit on that. And I think it was actually part of like the reference of it.
Right.
You could also easily change a lot of the colors, turn off LEDs if that's not your game. And I actually did specifically ask, can I also make the function keys be default to adjust things like screen brightness and other laptop functions, and that can also be adjusted too. Had a cool, that off-green look to it and like direct sunlight. Something you can't really see necessarily when you're in like
doesn't photograph very well.
Doesn't photograph very well, but it was actually a little bit green tinted, which was kind of cool. That was Intel CPUs with RTX 5090, the mobile version of that GPU. And they did target, I can't remember the exact number, but we just came from Panther Lake, which we saw like maybe max like 60 watts or something like that.
It's like 240, I think.
Yeah, it's 240. Yeah. It's like absolutely ridiculous numbers. If you're into mobile computing, that is not a great battery saving kind of performance level there. But that's not exactly what it's targeting. It's targeting, you can move this thing around and play where you want.
This is your ultimate desktop replacement laptop, and I'm sure it will be priced to match, although I did not get any
I didn't get
details on that. Obviously, RTX 5090 mobile, quite a beefy GPU, quite a beefy CPU there as well, quite a beefy system, quite a cool system. I would have some concerns over its long-term longevity. Some of these high-end PC laptops don't tend to age too well, but in this laptop's favor, it's not an ultra thin, right? So Alex, over in the corner there, he has a Razer Blade, quite a thin laptop.
And it's hot.
Very hot, very loud throttles. That did not age too well, it turns out. I think we also saw an Alienware Area 51 desktop there, which is pretty cool, I would say. Pretty interesting desktop, nicely put together. Standard in many ways, but also definitely delivered at a really high level of quality. There you have AMD and Intel CPU options, including the 9850X3D, brand new, fastest gaming processor in the world by some margin, even if it's only a few percentage points. RTX 5090 graphics up to, of course. It's got a huge casing. It's got a positive pressure design with no rear exhaust fan. And Alex, I think you had a couple notes here.
Yeah.
The QR codes were an area of interest, and then also some funny behavior on the displays that you noted as well.
They were using dual mode 4K 240, 1080p 480 monitors, and for some reason in Windows it was displaying as 60 hertz, but the actual monitor was running at 240 hertz. So for some reason, at least when you're using a triple monitor configuration, which this was, 3 4K 240 hertz monitors, which is insane, by the way. Apparently that Windows does not like reporting that correctly, which is funny. But the other thing that I thought was kind of fun was that on the inside of the case, they have little QR codes like around the motherboard or even on the motherboard itself, I believe, where you can essentially call them up on your phone and get like little tutorial videos about how to replace components if you don't know how to do that. So Alienware, obviously, if you're building your own machine, you probably don't go Alienware, right? But if you are someone who wants to get a high-end machine that is pre-built, they're offering you to give you a bit of knowledge about how to replace components, which is something, honestly, if it's your first time doing it, it could be scary. So that's pretty helpful.
Yeah, I do think it's cool, although I do wonder exactly how much of an impediment is a typical person going to have with typing that information to Google or ChatGPT and figure it out themselves.
You'd be surprised.
I am sure it would be.
We always see those posts about people plugging in the GPU into the iGPU, plugging in the HDMI cable into the iGPU port. So like, apparently people need a lot of information. Yeah,
but I would also say here, we were just looking at the very top end of Alienware's line. We weren't looking at the Dell. We weren't looking at the XPS laptops. There were our new XPS laptops
We did see them, but we didn't spend too much time on them.
Yeah. We also perhaps glanced at some other Alienware laptops that are perhaps being held behind closed doors that we can't talk about too much. They weren't disclosing too many details about those. But those are smaller, thinner, lighter laptops in this massive 18-inch behemoth and this gigantic full tower, I believe. So yeah, those are different options. We really were just looking at the very high end because that's kind of our remit and our want, and we only had a limited amount of time, so that's what we looked at.
Right.
Speaking of high-end laptops and PCs, we have Razer. Very cool brand. They obviously they're responsible for a lot of interesting products at CES, including one we'll talk about shortly that seems to have taken the internet by storm. But they had a lot of laptops for us. They also had obviously their usual retinue of peripherals, including some mice, including some headsets, including keyboards, including all kinds of different things, cat-eared headsets, very exciting, very engaging.
All that.
But I think we had a particular bone to pick with their use of Battlefield 6 to showcase, and in general, Battlefield 6 was a very
It was
common
literally in
showcase
every single showcase of every single thing, and it's the reason I have a big problem with it is because it doesn't actually show that much about your laptop's power level. It is very easy to run game. We also saw it running on different laptops at different settings. We saw it running on like low settings sometimes.
Right.
We saw it running on like on high and ultra. It was just like all across the board, depending upon where you were at CES here. We also saw stuff like the game having like people demo stuff strangely, and we always try and like point this out. Like one was just like constantly tearing all over the place, and
that was bizarre.
It was like same tear location no matter where you moved, you know. So like, and they're using Battlefield 6, which wasn't necessarily a great way to show the laptop's performance level. It just runs like, you know, it's a pretty low end game actually. So there's stuff like that. We also saw, you know, a variety of other things there, but. We'll get to the next topic about Razer, but to me, I was actually kind of more impressed with the Alienware laptops than I was with the Razer, mainly due to I'm not so keen these days on like the ultra aggressive gamer look. So,
I'm also, again, really, I do express some concerns about the pursuit of thinness in gaming laptops, in particular, the whittling down of those sizes. I think it was really enabled by the removal of the optical drive and the hard drive. That really enabled people to reach these like really aggressive thermal designs and actually have a laptop that was very thin. Indeed, a lot of these laptops now, they're shipping with 100-watt GPUs, and they're thinner than my MacBook Pro, which is totally crazy to me. Obviously, they do it, but they do so at the cost of having, you know, big fan grills and arrays and things that are easily blocked and potentially concerns. So again, you know, look out for that and potentially, you know, make your purchasing decision with that in mind. But I thought the Razer booth was pretty interesting here. They had a lot of interesting products, but I do have issues with the omnipresent use of Battlefield 6 as a demo game. I actually don't think it demos very much about your system, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it was also a little bit awkward because it's just like they're showing off like bot matches and stuff like that where, yeah, it was just not exciting. The other way.
Outside of those two vendors, though, Alex and I did prowl through the booths of the Venetian to try to figure out exactly what was going on in the realm of kind of smaller manufacturers who aren't necessarily big name brands. And we did see a lot of very interesting PC cases. We saw this very interesting liquid-cooled system, which actually had a Ryzen 8300G and no GPU, which is interesting for such a system like that.
It was all storage, and it had, at the front of it, if you recall, the DIMMs split up. Like two on the motherboard and two jutting out the front of this very interesting open case. Like, I have literally never seen anything like this before, and I have no idea what that DIMM performance is like when it's so far away from the CPU. Like, I have no idea what that's about. That was crazy looking. So that was really cool. I'd never seen that ever before. We saw a whole bunch of people using displays on top of the AIO on your CPU on a motherboard, and there was a variety of different types. There was ones that were like curved OLED.
Curved ones,
There were ones that were concave with multiple screens, giving you the illusion potentially of a hologram when you look at it, like a certain level. Like it gives you a little bit of a 3D look. And then there were the standard flat ones, and there were even probably weirder ones that I'm forgetting off the top of my head now. But that was like such a common thing to see this year, just like curved bent displays on top of a motherboard for the purpose of, I am not sure. It is not my style. I think we've talked about this a number of times, but I'm kind of really getting away from the blingy PC, and I was more interested in the ones that were quite subtler.
There are even some cases that weren't cases, like with this test bench PC, which is bizarre, and I would point the intrepid viewer over to the fact that this only has one stick of RAM wired up, which is not generally what you want to be doing in a system with a massive 360mm radiator with a high-end GPU with a high-end CPU presumably under there.
Just cut that in half.
That's unwise. Maybe you find the clearance, or at least the aesthetic permission, to put that second stick of RAM in there. But yeah, we also saw some pretty interesting stuff at the Gigabyte booth, but I would really say that the main star of the show there was their massive Hall of Mirrors tricks and their gigantic micro-LED displays that were blaring all kinds of advertisements at us. Very fun display. Indeed, at CES, there are always a lot of really fun and interesting displays, but oftentimes that isn't really backed up with the kind of product firepower that really shows off differentiation between vendors. I think some vendors did that pretty well. I actually think Razer did that pretty well.
They were different enough.
They do different kinds of things, but I don't think Gigabyte did a very good job actually with trying to make a case for themselves at CES relative to other OEMs and PC vendors.
I'd agree with that. Also, when you take a look at the fact that you're all using relatively similar hardware components, or even like sourcing stuff like monitors and panels from the same companies, and you have to really stand out in some way with the way you're like packaging that product up. It can't just be like a cool looking booth. It has to be interesting stuff there, and that's not always the case. CES, there's some stuff that's kind of a bummer, and there's more exciting things.
Yeah, that's kind of a perennial concern in an industry where the parts are commodity, and it's really the design and the brand and the identity that is unique, or should be unique. But in this case, I think we saw a lot of the same kinds of PC concepts, a lot of the same kinds of displays that were on CPU coolers, indeed a lot of the same exact displays that were on CPU coolers. Similar kinds of concepts, lots of PCs with very little ventilation, but a whole lot of acrylic and a whole lot of glass. I think that was another key theme. Even some wood, which I think is, I'm conflicted about, because I think it does look pretty, but it's also an insulator and a PC case, and that messes with my feng shui a little bit. I think you should have conductive metals, or at least glass.
It's interesting. Another thing that I noticed is, I don't know how in vogue it is anymore, but I noticed that there wasn't a lot of push-pull cases.
Oh yeah.
Like that. I think that's usually that's
positive pressure was pretty common.
Yeah. So I was expecting more of that, but I guess that's not right now what is in. So it just isn't.
Moving on from the wonderful world of PC hardware onto displays. Displays are kind of a key area of interest for me. At CES, they were a very key area of interest for me last year, which was our first time at CES, myself and Alex, because displays are always evolving, and there are new buzzwords, new keywords. We're familiar with QLED, OLED, mini LED, micro LED, all kinds of different acronyms that get thrown around here, and it's kind of hard to keep track of them, but sometimes the acronyms do have some meaning. And this year we were introduced to a new acronym, which is MicroRGB. From some vendors, from Samsung and LG, they'll tell you it's MicroRGB. Other vendors like Hisense will say it's RGB mini LED. And I think that latter moniker is more accurate because MicroRGB sounds very similar to MicroLED, which is not at all the same. It's actually very, very different in terms of the display technology there. So this is an interesting concept. Basically, the whole idea here is basically it's a mini LED TV. I mean, I'm simplifying it somewhat, but it's a mini LED TV, but with an RGB backlight. Instead of a white backlight, we end up with an RGB backlight. Now, why is that important? It means that you can have very high color vibrancy, at least in test patterns, because you can actually display that full vibrant color. You're not just relying on the filter, you're actually getting it from the backlight as well. That's quite good. Again, that's in test content. In real world content, where you might have a limited number of dimming zones, might have a limited number of backlight zones there, and you might have content that actually has wildly contrasting colors, has some interesting color arrangements there, you might not actually get that full color vibrancy. But at least in test patterns, it can satisfy the full BT 2020 standard, which most televisions are not nearly capable of achieving, unfortunately. Of course, there isn't much BT 2020 test content, but that is potentially one advantage.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of it, it's still the dimming zone based, and you could end up, at least in theory, although we didn't see this unfortunately with the test content, which perhaps you can talk about a little bit, but in theory, if there's like very fast movement, because you do actually have different colors behind that color filter, you might end up with some unpleasant combinations of colors that could lead to some really ugly artifacts, at least in theory, lead to some kind of smearing and perhaps video game content, which obviously is of some concern of ours.
Yeah, we don't know. Basically, they're demonstrating these things on very fast cutting, sometimes not ultra. They're very vibrant, but that doesn't mean like it's showing the contrast and like movement that you'd expect in a video game. And I think if it were to show like persistence or even just like pixel blur issues or motion blur issues that have like some sort of color fringing on them, which could potentially happen if there's a lag between the backlight and the real pixel movement. Like, we don't really know that right now.
No.
And the content was not conducive to even judging it. But the one thing that you did catch, obviously, you did catch the main thing, which was the color fringing with like some like really cool camera trickery there.
Yeah.
So you could show that off pretty well. It's not actually how it looks in person necessarily. You're showing it in a heightened way here, but so that is something that the panels do, and I guess that is seen as a positive.
Yeah, so basically like the classic mini LED problem, if I'm going to break it down for you, our dear audience, is that basically what you end up with in mini LED panels is you end up with blooming, right? You have a limited number of backlight zones. Typically on televisions, it's going to be about 1,500 backlight zones or less. Most mini LED televisions are shipping with something in the 3-figure range. So it might be 300, might be 500 backlight zones. And these obviously lead to some blooming where you don't have that perfect control over every single individual pixel. But the key difference here with MicroRGB is that backlighting behavior, that blooming, is actually colored in concordance with the actual picture area that it's displaying, that it's backlight illuminating. So you end up with colored blooming, which is actually seen as a desirable element of these displays relative to just having white blooming, because in theory, if you're looking at a green kiwi and you get that green backlight glow behind it, that is actually a little bit less obtrusive, a little bit less annoying than with a white backlight element there on a mini LED television. But there is a key compromise with these televisions. It's a more expensive process to produce these televisions, right? And there's been some rumor, although I was not able to ascertain this on the show floor, nor was I able to really get any sense of it from any specifications here, that these models might actually have fewer dimming zones than their mini LED counterparts. Wow. So that's a potential concern of this new technology. I think it has some interesting elements, but it's not necessarily going to be better than mini LED in every single case.
Okay, cool. So what about OLED though? We saw a number of panels moving on from MicroRGB, RGB, mini LED. We also saw a number of OLED panels, specifically at the LG booth that I was.
Yeah.
So we've been seeing OLED iterate for a number of years now, and one of the biggest thing is that, it just keeps getting brighter over time.
Right.
And that was kind of the initial impression when we saw LG's G6. I think it was like the very large 85-inch model.
83-inch.
83-inch, my bad. Very, very large, so that's impressive in its own right, but you have to have the space for that, as well as the distance between you, because 4K pixels is a lot, but is it that much? very bright. It was actually, I think it was right next to a mini LED television, if I'm not mistaken. Like here was the G6, and then I think there was a mini LED.
I think it might have been a MicroRGB.
Maybe it was a MicroRGB, but I was like, oh, this is, and they were showing somewhat similar content. I was like, oh, this OLED looks nice and bright. Sure, that looked great. But other than other OLED TVs I've seen in the past, I couldn't appreciate the better aspects of it. I really couldn't. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it is brighter.
Yeah.
It is a really, really bright display. And you guys know that I'm a big fan of bright displays. This was a display that satisfied my eyes. I will say that. But I will say against this television possibly, the content that we're showing off is like classic HDR test content. So it's like dark screens, starry skies, extremely bright pinpoints of light. They can punch that up. And indeed in this model, I think they're talking about 3,000 nits.
It's high.
Above 3,000 nits on those highlights, which is pretty crazy here. It is a staggeringly bright television. 83 inches is quite large for an OLED. Of course, that'll probably come with an equally large price tag because OLEDs don't tend to actually be all that well suited to large sized applications. They tend to be more expensive. They don't come in the ultra large sizes. So if you're interested in a 115-inch television, if you have $30,000 burning a hole in your pocket, you're not going to find that in an OLED. It's going to be substantially smaller. It's going to be pretty expensive relative to a similarly sized mini LED. I'd suspect even a probably similarly sized MicroRGB television. Those mini LED and MicroRGB televisions are really intended for large picture sizes, as well as a certain other display technology we'll be touching on in a moment. But I think there was another really, really interesting display at LG's booth, which is the W6. Now the W6 is a staggering accomplishment. Basically, as far as I can tell, it's the same panel technology that we see in the G6, but it has a couple of key elements that separate it from the G6. The first and most incredible element is that it is extremely thin. We're used to seeing very thin OLEDs, but this is a uniformly thin OLED panel with, I think, a 9.9 millimeter thickness. It's in that range. They say 9 millimeter class. It is extremely thin. Indeed, I put my finger up to it, and you can see it is thinner than my index finger there. They're actually cautioning people. They were telling people not to touch it, but they did not actually see me. They did not see me touch it. I got my finger in there. I got to touch it. I touched perfection, as it were. That's a really interesting element of these panels. But obviously, OLED panels, they can get really thin. We know OLEDs can be very svelte. We've seen flexible OLEDs. OLEDs, obviously, that's a key characteristic of the OLED panel type. But the other element of it, which you actually investigated a little bit more so than myself, is the fact that these are, number one, they use wireless connectivity. So and I have some concerns of this, of my own, but perhaps we can voice those in a moment. It uses a wireless link to connect to a base station, which has your HDMI ports on it, right?
Yes.
So it does not actually have HDMI ports connected to it. It doesn't even have the One Connect box functionality, which is like one cable that goes into a box that has your HDMI, has all your ports, has your optical audio, whatever. This is a totally wireless system, and it still supports high refresh rates. It still supports 4K. That's a concern of mine. I had some problems with the One Connect box on a Samsung S95D. A couple of years ago when I tested that out. Did not work out well for me. I ended up exchanging that for my mini LED panel, which I still have today, which is quite nice. You also had an interesting bit of spelunking looking for the power cord on this unit.
It was very well hidden in the demo unit.
Yeah.
Then I kind of asked someone and they pointed it out to me. But yeah, it's kind of like hidden in the back. It's a flat power cord, I believe. So it can be hidden along a wall maybe or behind something. Not that bad. Pretty cool. Yeah.
The whole concept of this television, I think, is you want to mount it flush against something, especially if that something happens to be a piece of transparent glass, which is how they've mounted it here. It looks really, really cool. It's a very, very neat television, but I think in the critical elements of an OLED panel, your brightness, your pixel density, your panel sizes, your pixel response times, whatever, it should be identical to the G6. It's basically just a higher upmarket G6, pay a bit more, same panel, similar performance. That's what you should be getting. So it's really I was about to say vanity piece. I don't want to say it's a vanity piece. It's obviously people treat these televisions like they are pieces of art. We've seen that with the frame televisions. This seems like a extreme version of that concept. It is a very beautiful television, but if you just want picture quality, the G6 will do you just as well, if not better. And if you do have some concerns about the quality of that wireless link, I have no idea how good that will be. I would certainly have some concerns if I was putting regularly 4K 144 hertz content, 4K 120 hertz content through that, especially at high bit rates, HDR, all that good stuff. I would have some concerns with that potentially.
We don't know.
We don't know. They also showed off a transparent OLED panel, which is interesting. I'm a bit befuddled by this. I think we saw this last year as well, so it's not necessarily new, but I always wonder exactly what the audience is for this, because they're kind of transparent, but almost not in a visually compelling way. They look kind of murky, they look kind of messy, like almost like you're looking through a fish tank that hasn't been cleaned in a while.
Yeah, or just like dirty sunglasses. It's like, it's not a very, so looking through it isn't interesting. It's more like just a like a semi-interesting light phenomena that you're observing, and it's like a curiosity. Like you pointed out really well. Oh, some stuff looks more transparent than other. Like the fish and the rock look surprisingly opaque, and it's like, oh, why is that the case? I have no idea, but it's more like a visual curiosity, and I can't imagine using this for any serious amount of watching or gaming or anything other than it just be like sitting in the background in some like rich person's house.
Yeah,
it's a very strange tech, but it's cool that we can do transparent, like light emitting surfaces now and have them look reasonably, like opaque.
It's a cool tech demo, and if you were hopping around Bill Gates, Sergey Brin, their homes, maybe they might have they might have a display like this, and it is cool. And one element of it that I thought was actually pretty neat is that those fish, those bits of plant life, those bits of coral, they are quite opaque. They're very hard to see through. They do that well. They are very bright. It does look cool. It is like very thin. It is a cool looking television. I mean, I almost don't even want to call it a television. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of those fake fireplaces that people have.
Oh gosh, but those are tacky.
Those are tacky. I think this is cooler. It's about as much cooler as it is more expensive, I imagine. So that's an unfortunate element. Again, not really a display in the same way that the G6 is. The W6 is a display, but it is a cool panel, I would have to say. But I think we should move on to a display technology that has a ton of hype. Indeed, if you listen to all the prominent TV and display prognosticators on the internet, a lot of influencers out there, they will tell you that this is the future of panel technology. And this is MicroLED. Now, do not confuse this with MicroRGB. I know these names are very, very similar. MicroRGB is nothing like MicroLED. MicroLED, if you can think of it, it's basically a very miniaturized version of the kind of signage displays that we see in airports and convention centers. Indeed, in this footage of Alex looking wistfully towards them like he's watching Blade Runner 2049 or something. Yeah. We see those signage displays.
Dystopic almost. In this case, the whole thing that everyone hypes about it is we love the brightness of mini LED, but we want to have higher contrast and better, deeper blacks like we see in OLED, which we don't necessarily get. And this is the solution to it. But like last year, if you recall, we had actually some somewhat negative opinion of all the micro LED displays we saw. And this year we walked up to a variety of them of different sizes. A number of them are actually ridiculously huge. And we see the exact same issue as before, where these are obviously made up of a number of constructed sub-elements of, like, let's say, I don't know how many actually it was, but imagine like a 100 by 100 pixel grid, and they're all like either glued or constructed together. And these form seams in the image that are very, very visible. So they really can only be appreciated from a very far distance. This is not meant actually for like putting it in your home and watching and playing movies, films, series, games on it, because you would immediately see the large seams across the entire image, and it is not flattering at all. Like, I think all the advantages it could potentially have in other aspects of image quality just don't exist when you realize you're just like looking at it with these big seams on it, right?
Right. That's a big problem here. Indeed, depending on the set, you might notice that there's like a few big seams that might have like a kind of squared off pattern, or indeed it might be like hundreds of individual panels constructed together. With these micro-LED displays, I would say the seams are by far the biggest issue with the panels. I don't know if that's like a temporary concern, if it's like they're temporarily embarrassed by this phenomenon, and if it will improve in the future. Obviously, even just the phenomenon of cramming so many tiny little LEDs into a television, that's a pretty mammoth accomplishment, I'd have to say. But it does come with some compromises. I'm not sure necessarily they can be overcome with advanced process manufacturing technology. Like the nature of these individual picture elements, these individual LEDs, is such there's a considerable pixel pitch around them, so they tend to look a little bit screen doory relative to other televisions, which really have much less of that screen door effect, have very minimal border between them, not really discernible in any typical use. Here it's actually quite noticeable, I would say.
Yeah, it's even like at reasonable distances we'd noticed it. It also like creates like a moire effect to a little degree, depending upon where you're looking at it from. So another issue where I am a little bit wondering what, if unless there's some sort of like roadmap saying that we can fix these issues over time, I don't see them becoming a replacement for mini LED or OLED anytime soon.
Yeah. I think the one key advantage of this television, I mean, it has some advantages in terms of not having so much persistence blur. I think that's one key issue that people have noted with these displays. They also get extremely large, so you can basically build them, I mean, really to any arbitrary size because of the way they're constructed. They don't have the same harsh limits on their construction as, like, let's say an OLED television or even like a mini LED television. You can make them in sizes indeed like this TCL, 163 inches, which is burgeoning on the size of some cinema displays. But there was perhaps another display technology, or so-called supposed display technology, that is perhaps even better suited to large format displays, and that is the so-called laser TV. Now in my notes here I've just written fake.
Yeah.
And this is fake. Why is it fake? It's fake because it's a short throw projector. It is not a television. It's a short throw projector with a projector material, right? So it's going to have all the same limitations that projectors typically have, which is that it can't do HDR. It has poor brightness, relatively dim. It has bad black levels. It has, allegedly, in this case they're advertising it as having a 150-inch size. That's not true. I mean, it might have a 150-inch size for a given distance, right? For a given distance from the projector material, but it's not strictly limited to 150 inches, but you probably wouldn't want to go much bigger than 150 inches, because even at 150 inches, it's quite dim. So this is not really a satisfactory product here, I would have to say. This is a fake TV. It's not a TV. And in this day and age, especially when we think about the sizes of televisions that are coming out now, unless you want a really big display and you don't have much money to spend, I couldn't really recommend a projector for very many people.
No, also just like the inherent chromatic aberration in the image that we saw. We did see it running at higher refresh rate, I think. It was just like really, I don't understand what the purpose was. It was basically like a projector and, you know, it's kind of questionable quality. We also kind of hilariously saw it running an Xbox Series X playing Halo 4.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
It must have just been someone who really, really loved Halo 4. But that's what it was. That's how you'd want to use this laser TV, I guess.
Yeah, a pretty beleaguered console. Actually, I saw 2 Xbox Series X's on the show floor. I did not see any PlayStation 5s. Actually, Sony did not have any presence at CES whatsoever, it seemed like. It's certainly not their PlayStation brand, certainly not their televisions, which is a curious change from last year. Last year they had a massive booth.
It was huge.
Not a whole lot to show with music and a DJ, and it was very, very loud, and they had some PlayStation set up running Horizon Forbidden West. Nothing too exciting there. They were showing off some monitors as well. Nothing too crazy here. But yeah, Halo 4, a game released on the Microsoft Xbox 360, a 20-year-old, 21-year-old almost console running a game that is, 13, 14 years old? Yeah. On a console that's 5 years old and not doing so hot in the market, but they did not get this impression, perhaps. I suspect this probably came down to one booth employee who had a very strong view as to the strength of 343 Industries, aka Halo Studios now, first Halo entry.
Right, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I wanted to look at some mini LEDs as well, but it seemed like the mini LED vendors were not out in as much of a full force effort as they were last year. Last year, the mini LED panel makers were very happy to advertise their extremely large mini LED panels. There are 100-inch mini LED panels, there are 115-inch mini LED panels. They were really nice, really exciting, and I think they had good image quality characteristics when you consider how much of an impact 115 inches makes when you're sitting in front of it. There were some mini LED panels on display this year, but the focus really seemed to be on the MicroRGB panels.
Right.
On the OLEDs to a lesser extent. Even on the MicroLED panels. Not so much on the bog standard, Yeoman mini LED panel, even though they're still perfectly good, and even though, in my mind, it's not clear that at least the current incarnation of MicroRGB televisions is necessarily better than mini LED televisions, at least again as they're currently constructed. I understand the baseline technology might be a better technology, but it's not necessarily going to end up in current products that way. We didn't actually see a whole lot of mini LEDs.
No. In fact, we commented it right as we got out of the LG booth. We were like, wait, did we even look at a mini LED in there? And we're like, no.
Yeah. But Alex, perhaps more important than any particular piece of TV technology that we saw in actual panels, and certainly more important than any particular television that we saw on the show floor, even the incredible LG W6, is the display signaling standards that actually drive modern televisions.
Right.
And we actually had a little visit from the HDMI forum and their great booth here. They were actually showing off something that does not really photograph incredibly well, but it's the HDMI 2.2 standard cables, aka HDMI Ultra 96 cables. Mm-hmm. So why don't you explain exactly what we saw with these HDMI cables and what makes them significant for next generation computers, next generation video game consoles potentially, and certainly the displays of the future.
Yeah, basically here we're seeing, right now we're limited to display ports max and then HDMI 2.1's max stuff. We're talking about like 4K 165 with display port for a lot of televisions, or 4K 120 with HDMI 2.1 for a lot of things, not including DSC compression to boost that up to like 4K 240. So we're going to need, if we want to push refresh rates and resolution higher, we can talk about how useful that all is in a second. We're going to need a new general standard between PC and console and other devices, and that's where HDMI 2.2 comes in. The biggest upgrade is going to come from the Ultra 96 version of HDMI 2.2, which will offer greater bandwidth for things like HDR at higher resolutions at higher refresh rates with no chroma subsampling, right, which is kind of what we want for the future, for future devices. Right now, there are no devices that can even power this. So the display booth here is literally just cables and none of the content and none of the televisions and none of the devices that are actually going to be powering this in the future. But as I mentioned, I said Ultra 96. Well, that's because now HDMI 2.2, kind of like DX12, has like sub versions, and there's essentially they're wrapping in HDMI 2.0 and 2.1 into the 2.2 standard, and they have like different names under them. I can't remember the exact ones off the top of my head, but HDMI 2.2 actually encompasses kind of like, it's a superset. It encompasses actually older versions of HDMI 2.0.
Yeah.
But 2.2 was kind of cool because one thing that I really liked is that the gentleman who we were talking to didn't say too much to us, but he handed me a cable, and I was like, what's the maximum cable length? And he said, did he say 300 meters? Or
300 meters.
He said 300 meters, which Oliver and I can attest to this with HDMI 2.1. We have had a lot of trouble getting HDMI 2.1 cables to perform uniformly, I would say. Like sometimes you can buy one and it may be dithering the signal in a way that isn't great for our tools. After a certain distance, it actually may not function well. John has dealt with this issue before with his setup, which is a bit further away from stuff like his PCs. I don't have actually a great HDMI 2.1 cable standard experience so far. And here it seems like 2.2 could actually make that a much better situation with you as a consumer buying something and maybe not being afraid that after a certain distance it won't work too well.
Yeah, though that was with fiber optic cables and a chip on both ends,
Yeah,
so that would
some
probably
sort of
be
amplification.
a pretty expensive cable, I have to imagine. So I don't actually expect HDMI 2.2 products to hit the market for some years. I'd be even surprised if the PS6 is an HDMI 2.2 product. I really don't think it'll be here for a while, and I think the kinds of refresh rates that are contemplated by HDMI 2.2 probably need some considerable advancement in televisions to actually hit when you're talking about 240 hertz, 40 hertz refresh rates. So Alex, I wanted to move on a little bit, perhaps ever so briefly, into the world of monitors, because actually I was kind of disappointed by the CES. I had a number of monitors I wanted to take a look at. There was a 3D monitor that we unfortunately did not have the time to take a look at because it was located at a different site. It was the Samsung 6K 32-inch glasses-free 3D monitor. That was pretty cool, potentially. There was also an LG 27-inch, I think 5K 165 hertz monitor with 2,304 dimming zones, I believe.
Right.
It looked like a really cool Mac monitor to me. It looked like the perfect evolution over my studio display, which, while it's a quite good 5K display, is uniformly lit. It has a uniform backlight, has a pretty laggy IPS panel. It's only 60 hertz. It is 5K, it's super crisp, but I would like an upgrade. I think Apple will probably deliver an upgrade to that studio display later this year, so that's what I'm looking forward to. But I was considering this monitor as a potential alternative to that. Unfortunately, I was not able to see it. It seemed like LG really wanted to showcase their most exciting products, right? So they showed us some interesting, they even had some, I think 5K, 2K monitors out there,
Right.
but they did not actually have this 27-inch monitor that I would be quite so fond of. But we did see a lot of monitors in our time at CES, just not a whole lot that really stood out to us. There were a lot of 4K 240 hertz monitors, those classic 32-inch 4K OLEDs. Alex, those were really common last year, not nearly as common this year. At least in terms of their placement at this show, in terms of their promotion at the show. We're pretty used to seeing those monitors, but there is an evolution of that QD-OLED tech potentially here that was shown off by Asus at their booth. I believe they're calling it, I can't quite tell, it's either Dark Shield or Black Armor. I believe between them and MSI, they've come up with different names for what is fundamentally the same kind of display coating technology. Could you describe the kind of differences that we observed with a QD-OLED with this Dark Armor technology, with this Black Shield technology, and without the last generation model?
So basically they had them arrayed side by side, and in a very well lit room, which this was, it was, very well lit. It's artificial lighting inside a, completely closed off area, very well lit. The two monitors side by side, with the difference between them being essentially the coating on the monitor, this Black Shield, Black Armor, Dark Shield stuff on it. The subjective appraisal is, this red is much more saturated on the newer Dark Armor one, and it doesn't look as if the surface of the screen is capturing as much of like that diffuse reflection from the lighting around it. So it looked a lot less purple in this lighting, like the black looked less purple. I hope that comes across in the footage that Oliver took of it. I mean, it's a nice advancement for well-lit environments, which is an area where OLEDs have struggled in the past due to brightness concerns and whatnot. But here, it was a bit kind of an artificial setting. On a technical level, if you're playing this in like a normal, slightly darker room, it probably wouldn't be that big of a difference. But here, definitely you could see it. One thing that we did notice is these QD-OLEDs didn't have any of the stuff to prevent color fringing. So I believe both had color fringing, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yeah.
So still color fringing. That tech wasn't in. Something to prevent that was not in these group of monitors.
Yeah. And I would actually have to say that, I mean, listen, I did see the difference in a well-lit room. I did see the difference. But obviously, in a dark room, which is the ideal playing scenario for an OLED monitor when you're actually gaming, you would not really notice the difference, I suspect. I don't think you'd notice that kind of magenta hue, that kind of blooming over the display. And also to really see it, like to really properly see it and appreciate it, they were shining a bright little LED light, super bright LED that we might see used for photography purposes or filming purposes.
Yeah, no one
quite
would
used to
do
them.
that. That's crazy.
No one would do it. It's like almost comical the extent to which you'd have to go through to really show like a super meaningful difference that someone, a casual observer, would look at and be like, oh wow, that's a big difference. You know, this is not the kind of technology that you should be upgrading your OLED for. Even that kind of, you know, looking at this footage just now, the side by side, I mean, it is a little bit more of a saturated red. I don't know that it makes a huge difference.
I mean, it was slightly more visible than in the footage, but like at the same time, like it wasn't like, this wasn't the most interesting demo by far.
Yeah.
Right next to it, we also saw an RGB OLED demo. Fortunately, this one, due to kind of, we got interrupted while we were talking about it. So I didn't get a greater look at it, but the advantage of this one should technically be no fringing on like yellow. And I swear when we looked at the text inside Battlefield 5 running on it, I swear there was fringing on the yellow text.
Yeah.
Even though that is, I'm sure that is what this technology is supposed to be preventing.
Yeah.
I cannot completely comment on as to why that was the case, but it was the case. Maybe because it was set up to be 422 in the control panel or 420 because the person who was doing this display set it up wrong. I don't know why, but it definitely had color fringing.
Yeah, that was certainly an area of some concern. I'd also have an area of some concern with people who buy these gigantic multi-monitor curved OLED setups to play racing games. Now, maybe this is a very specific objection. It's actually something that Alex said that I'm now stealing for the purposes of this discussion. But he pointed out, why would you have one of these crazy racing setups? Indeed, we saw some really crazy ones. Like at LG, they had this gigantic, I think, 39-inch 5K OLED, 5K 2K OLED monitors in this racing setup with like tilt, pan, vibration, all this crazy stuff. This guy's really locked in here. He's going nuts. He's going crazy. This looked fantastic. But number one, why wouldn't you just use a VR headset in this scenario?
Yeah.
That's my first objection. The second objection is that driving these massive 5K displays, the game's running at like 40 FPS.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And also 5K at that distance, you're not going to be getting any of that. The pixel density
that's like, well past Retina resolution.
Yeah, it's like it's like this is totally demo stuff that doesn't like. There's no purpose. I would totally rather at the Pimax booth. We didn't actually try it out, but the Pimax booth did show the VR equivalent of this, and I can imagine that is only so much more interesting from a simulation perspective. So we saw a number of those, and we just kind of questioned what the utility of them was.
I would say that's like a big issue in general with CES, is just seeing something that looks absolutely wild, absolutely insane, but having absolutely no idea who it's for, or having absolutely no idea why you wouldn't just go with another clearly better solution. I mean, maybe I can see some scenarios where ultra-wide monitors are more useful than a VR headset in some gaming scenarios, yes. But in this particular gaming scenario, it feels like if you're actually sitting down into a racing sim, you're getting strapped in, why not just strap on a VR headset?
Yeah,
and have a nice field of view. I mean, even like, I remember PSVR 1 playing Drive Club. That was pretty incredible back in the day. I think I'd prefer that to a lot of these setups, at least in terms of immersion.
Yeah.
But Alex, I think we wanted to touch on something that's out of complete left field here. It has nothing to do with any particular technologies that we saw at CES. It was running, I believe, on a system at AMD's booth with a 9850X3D CPU and an RX 9070 XT GPU, so it does have that going for it. But this is actually a game. It's called Crimson Desert. Now, I did not actually overhear very much of your technical musings on this game. I know you're speaking with a quite well-informed, I think, marketing manager for the studio there. Mm-hmm. But you actually came away extremely impressed by this game. It's not on a commodity engine. It's not Unity. It's not even a Frostbite. It's certainly not Unreal. It's their own custom engine here. It's a game that kind of came out of left field. I think it's coming out in about 10 weeks or so.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but you definitely had some interesting conversations.
Yeah.
And you definitely saw some impressive tech.
So this is really cool. It's using the Black Space engine, as it's called, I believe. And it's pushing a lot of stuff that we see in other engines, but it's nice to see custom tech from what I believe is a Korean developer here, not using Unreal, and which they're very proud of. Is using a diffuse and specular, as they called it, path trace GI solution. We'll have to see what that means for the final product. That's what it was described as. So you'd get nice diffuse lighting across the scene, indirect lighting, as well as your specular reflections, which did mix with some SSR elements.
Yeah.
But a lot of it still was RT reflections there. Really big range LOD with like very few imposters, if any imposters at all. Local RT lights, as it was described. I'm not sure if it's RT shadows or the lights are RT, as in the direct lighting is. I don't know about it, any of that. It's one of these things that I just have to look at. It was at AMD's booth, and it was running on this RX 9070 XT. It's 4K output, and they were running it at native res. Yeah. I think it was maybe using the game standard TAA.
It did not. The image quality
was left
room
some
for
to be
desired.
Yeah, because it didn't look like FSR 4 native. Foliage was an issue, and I don't think FSR 4 would have issues with that.
No.
But yeah, this was running. It looked like in like the 40 to 50 FPS region to my eye. That's where I'd throw it at.
It was kind of VRR'd.
It was VRR'd. Yeah. But the whole deal is the final game on AMD will be supporting FSR Redstone, and here it means the super resolution, FSR 4 super resolution, or just FSR as they call it now, or something like that. It'll be supporting MLFG, and it will also support ray regeneration, if I'm not mistaken. So this will be one of the titles with ray regeneration coming out in the future. Really cool to check out what that means. It was not running in this demo. We could not go into the options. This demo was also an older build, so it didn't have some other really cool tech. They have like a really awesome water simulation in the game with like tons of particles, and it actually has like flow to it and varying height. It isn't just like a deformable mesh that goes up and down and undulates. It does seem to be kind of like realish water based upon particles, which you don't see in almost any games, kind of like physics of old. So I'm going to cover this when it comes out. Hopefully, I hope I get enough lead up to release to make a larger video covering it, because it seems like a great PC focused release here from using custom tech, which we will always want to celebrate on the channel. And I was happy to be surprised with it and see it at the AMD booth, which, like I said, was pretty diverse. They had this little gaming corner, and it was probably the standout thing. One of the standout things I saw at the show.
Yeah, it's funny you say gaming corner, because gaming was definitely put in the corner in a lot of areas with respect to CES this year. But this was a really standout title. I'd be really curious, to provide my own context here, I'd be really curious to see how this runs on consoles. It does seem to be doing some pretty impressive things. Reminds me a lot actually of Dragon's Dogma in terms of its overall look, overall scope.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a different angle on it, some more fantastical elements, less of that kind of like low fantasy vibe, maybe a bit of a more high fantasy vibe crossed with, I don't know, kind of some Forspoken almost in there.
Yeah.
With the way that the particles look and
the way you jump
crazy
across the
acrobatics.
Yeah,
that looks pretty cool. I am a little bit curious because they did talk about path tracing. It did not really necessarily look like a lot of other path trace games to me.
I think what they mean is that, they are not maybe caching their stuff, as in there's not some sort of caching structure. Right. It was described as path trace GI. I don't know what that means necessarily. We're going to have to wait.
Yeah, and there definitely was like a lot of SSR in the mix with respect to the specular reflections there as well.
Yeah, that was obvious enough.
So interesting tech. I think the really standout thing here to me is that it's new, novel technology. I think it might be based off of an evolution of their prior title, which I think was Black Desert, possibly.
Yeah, that's pretty old now at this point.
Quite old title. But yeah, I'm really curious to see how this game lands. I'm really curious to see how it fares on consoles. And yeah, hopefully they can stick the landing on this one, because I'm always a big fan of new technology, and it's quite rare that we see novel technology in games in terms of novel game engines. And it's even more rare that we see the introduction of a new game engine, new technology to games from a developer that we maybe don't have like super crazy high expectations for. It wasn't necessarily on our radar.
Not super on the radar, no.
Yeah, not super on the radar. I think that's actually really cool, and I'm looking forward to it for sure. So look forward to Alex's coverage on that, and perhaps my or Tom, perhaps our less impressive follow-up console coverage as our one. Because I think this is more of a PC-focused title. I think
that's the gist I got, but we'll see when it comes out.
Yeah. So just to close out this video here, Alex and I saw a lot of things that I put on our sheet as frivolities. Frivolities. We also called it CES weirdness on our sheet. It basically comes down to a number of interesting concepts that we saw at CES. Again, products that are made in some cases for attention. In other cases, they have very interesting applications or they're very compelling in their own technical terms. But they're the kinds of things that tend to stick out from CES. They're the kinds of things that you'll see in like a Verge headline, for instance, about CES. These are not the standard, how many dimming zones does my television have? What's the dot pitch on my micro-LED? These are not the kinds of questions that are being contemplated by these technologies. These are actually new and interesting and innovative technologies in their own ways that we thought we'd want to reflect on here.
Yeah. Let's start with the first one. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't find this very compelling at all, but it's getting enough headlines and enough, it's weird in its own right. I believe they call it, from Razer, we hinted at it earlier, Project Ava or Alva. I don't know, I actually know the pronunciation. I think it was said multiple ways at the booth, unless I'm mistaken. It's a avatar on a reflective, it almost looks like the canister that the ooze was in TMNT2. And it's got like this avatar that's rendering in 3D on a laptop or any device it's hooked up to. Here they're showing in a Razer laptop, showing this little avatar. It can take any form. They showed me a guy named Zane, a buff, handsome fellow. Really reminded me of a Tim and Eric sketch almost, and then also like a Miku lookalike. Right. Talking to me in a voice, and it can comment on your gameplay by like it's like essentially looking at where your screen is. It's plugged into like some sort of large language model, and it's doing text to speech, and it can listen to you, I believe, if you ask it questions. It can give you any information you ask it about like what the weather is outside. It's just like a strange interface for interactions with something like ChatGPT. And I also don't think the screen looked very good that it was projecting onto, or whatever it was doing. It didn't look very good.
Alex, I think the key problem with this demo is that it didn't really show me anything new, because the problem here is basically you have these fundamental capabilities that we now see in LLMs, right? We have the ability to read visual information off a screen. We have the ability to see information from a webcam. We have the ability to synthesize text, synthesize speech using other models that feed into an LLM. We have the ability to retrieve information in real time from the internet. All these capabilities were shown off in this demo. They're nice capabilities, and if you showed this demo to me in 2019, I would have done anything to take this, because it's like the most incredible thing that I would have ever seen at that time. But obviously, since then, we've had so many developments in machine learning, so many developments in LLMs. Obviously, I don't need to belabor that point too much. Certainly since 2020, 2021, the introduction of GPT-3, the subsequent developments in LLMs, we've obviously seen a lot of these advancements since then. As far as I can tell, this is not really doing anything new in that space. The one new thing this is doing, relative to other systems I've seen, is that it is using a low-quality display. It's using a low-quality display. It really does just look like kind of a pretty mediocre, pretty crappy display, to be honest.
Bad viewing angles.
Yeah, that's basically this display that has poor viewing angles, that is in a kind of glass cylinder, but that isn't really doing anything for it. It's kind of trying to create the impression of some kind of holographic display. Now, holographic displays aren't really possible at the moment. There are different kinds of volumetric displays that people try to implement. One way that people try to implement holographic-like displays is through the use of LEDs and spinning fan blades and things like this that change their color parameters. We saw this at CES. Unfortunately, it does not photograph very well, so it did not show up too well on camera. But yeah, this did not seem very compelling. I also found it interesting that they were using the Grok LLM, which is obviously from Elon Musk's XAI company, from X, formerly known as Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter. And it actually seems very similar to this technology that he revealed, which is this Grok companion, these Grok characters, these like 3D characters that you can talk to, that talk back to you. This actually seems extremely similar to this technology, even though look and appearance of the characters is quite similar. I wonder if they're using similar technology to maybe drive the way they're talking, right? I think it's a similar kind of tech stack, and the fact they're using Grok here suggests to me that maybe this is a similar kind of thing. Again, I think this is like kind of derivative of that, or at least it seems like a fairly similar product, except that you're combining it with a low quality, supposedly holographic display. Now, I actually would prefer just a regular bog standard LCD or really almost any other kind of display here relative to this display. I actually don't think it's a good way to show off this content.
Yeah, I just also failed to see what its purpose is.
Yeah.
I just the entire I was giggling, I guess, because it's like so stupid.
Yeah.
But then after a while, I was like, wait a minute, what is this going to be used for? And then I just kind of I frown.
Well, Alex is putting it somewhat diplomatically there, but yeah, there would be some concerns about the usage of this product. But yeah, I think this product probably wasn't really for us. I mean, I think it kind of photographs well in some environments, but when you look at it from the side, you can start to see the whole illusion of it break down. I was not a big fan of that, unfortunately. But what I was a big fan of is something that I was really looking forward to at this CES, and that is robots. Now, unfortunately at CES, there are a lot of robots that I would call fake robots or uninteresting robots because they're doing things with robotics that aren't really hard problems in robotics. So what they're doing is basically they'll have this base, this wheeled base, this Roomba base, okay?
Yeah.
This Roomba base lets them wheel around in any number of directions. It isn't anything new. It isn't anything that interesting. And then they'll have this kind of biped top half with the arms that move. Or we did see quadruped robots, and you can see in this video here.
Yeah, they're pretty old these days, though. It's like old
yeah, quadrupeds have been around since about 2009, 2010. Boston Dynamics was showing off some sophisticated quadrupeds. That's not really a new technology, and obviously because you have 4 points of contact with the ground, it's a lot easier to have a quadruped working in real life. If you're not convinced, ask any baby. What do babies do? They're quadrupeds. They started as quadrupeds. They end up as bipeds. I mean, hopefully, most of them do.
Yeah.
Most of them do. But yeah, they started as quadrupeds, end up as bipeds. That really shows the kind of difficulties involved here. So that was most of what we saw. But then we saw 2 or 3 demos that were really impressive. So the first one here is this fairly simple demo that might not seem crazy impressive at first glance, but then you realize, holy, that is a robot walking around, balancing, proper quadruped, walking around, doing this whole routine, walking backwards, walking forwards, walking side to side, tilting, doing all these actions, again, in a kind of repetitive and maybe not too exciting manner. But this is like, RoboCop, basically in person. It does look quite a bit like RoboCop.
Just like RoboCop.
Yeah, that was a cool demo, and I think we were quite impressed by that demo. But then we saw a demo that astounded me, absolutely astounded me. So what we started off with was the robots doing a number of dances that were a little bit more acrobatic, a little bit more engaging, involved more active hip flexion, movement, back and forth movement, on things that are kind of dynamic and unstable movement systems. So you see this kind of flossing dance here. That is actually pretty complex to do. I'm not sure that I could do that in person. The robot was doing
We'll
it
see
though.
it.
Yeah, the robot was doing it though. And then the other interesting element to this demo was that the robots seemed to be kind of quasi-interacting. They were at least moving around and navigating that space without colliding with each other, which I thought was, an achievement of its own. Obviously, they have some kind of computer vision system there. I don't think it's just a man in a suit with a VR headset, as has been the case with some VR demos from perhaps the progenitor of XAI himself.
Maybe.
Quite possibly. But this was a very interesting demo already, right? That was pretty cool. And then, interestingly enough, one of the robots started to adopt this fighting posture. It started to adopt this fighting posture and putting up its dukes, as it were, and getting ready to fight something. And that was kind of a little bit curious, but then what happened absolutely astounded me. This woman stepped into the ring and started fighting the robot. Wow. So this is absolutely incredible. So what you're seeing here is this woman fighting this robot, colliding with the robot. The robot is stable. It's maintaining its position. She punches the robot punches back. She even kicks the robot. And at one point she kicks the robot and it falls over. And some helpful bystanders help the robot back up, back on its feet. You can see it pick itself up from a completely lying back position, re-enter the fight. Wow. This is absolutely insane. I've seen a lot of robot demos in my time. I'm very familiar with the state of the art in terms of some of the American robotics companies, in terms of the Optimus robot, that is obviously very popular, in terms of some of the Boston Dynamics demos. Obviously, they're a very early leader in this space, but to actually see this dynamic fight between a human and a robot interacting, fighting, punching. I mean, granted, perhaps some of the movements are a little bit stiff, perhaps you can make some critiques, but this is like absolutely next level stuff, and it really astounded me.
Yeah, it was. I just really liked when the robot picked itself up because it's a pretty complex movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I don't see a lot of robot fighting in my life, to be honest with you. But yeah, a very cute little demo. I'm very interested in robotics and when it can start doing stuff that are like nuisance in our lives, like manual labor,
Right.
cleaning up clothes in my house or something like that, But this is like one of the steps in that direction. Hopefully we see more of it.
Yeah, yeah. Alex, I noted that you put something on the sheet here that just says hologram AI avatar. I'm not totally sure that I saw that as much as you did. Why don't you describe that?
Okay, so, well, like the Ava demo or the Project Ava demo from Razer, there were actually a couple of other AI avatar demos, some of them on 2D screens, and I did see at least one of them was on a projected hologram using the spinning fans like you described earlier. Right. And this leads into my discussion of AI, I would say, and everyone was talking about it, that just the entire show there were some things that weren't using the buzzword, but pretty much every single thing was using the buzzword. And I don't know, some of like how compelling these things are, I'm not certain. A number of them weren't very compelling from my view. And there was actually, we were talking about Dell and Alienware earlier, but there was like a little, I believe, blurb from an interview that was with PC Gamer here, and basically Dell not walking back, but just saying like the consumer interest in the AI PC is not like 100% there.
Right.
And they need to start advertising their PCs and specifically laptops among other categories, not just like, oh, it can do AI, ML tasks or whatever, but people care about screens, brightness, battery life, power and performance.
Right.
And honestly, those were the things that interested me most. Other than, I guess the robots were interesting, but like, yeah, I was like more interested in traditional computing than I was in a lot of the AI stuff.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Alex that like there is some definite AI fatigue in the market. Now, I obviously have had a bit of a long-standing interest in LMs, at least since GPT-2, and certainly with GPT-3, I really felt like things were kicking off, and obviously those are hilariously primitive relative to what we have now. But I think it's really, the question to me is really, what does the physical embodiment and what does the consumer product associated with AI look like, right? Does it look like a wearable? Does it look like a headset? Does it look like a car? Does it look like a robot? What does it look like in the near term future, at least? Because with these AI models, the distribution is as easy as anything else on the internet. Even perhaps easier, because to use ChatGPT, I don't have to download the ChatGPT model in the same way that like to play a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, I'd have to download the game. It's just something that's easily accessible via the internet. It's something that's easily spreadable, easily shareable, show it to your friends. There's no kind of impairment there. And it's not necessarily clear to me that there's like a better AI product, like shoving it into a laptop would necessarily be better than honestly just having something on your phone. I mean, the phone already has video input, has audio input, you're always carrying it with you. Like that almost seems like the perfect AI device. Doesn't it really seem like you need a specialty AI device to me?
Yeah, there's also like AI home demos that we just totally skipped over. There was like AI fridge demo. Like I'm not even AI lawnmower, AI tractor.
Don't forget AI coffee recommendations.
AI coffee recommendation, which I have no idea what that's about. So it was like being used for a lot of stuff where it's like added to an appliance. And honestly, with a lot of appliances, I really care about, this is kind of goes back to the Dell statement, I care about longevity, reliability, and ease of repair. And all these things actually seem like they'd get in the way of those kind of things. Like when it's attached to like a dedicated appliance, and I'm like, I'm not interested. And your argument here about it, like it makes more sense when it's attached to like something that's easily transportable and universal. That seems much more like realistic to me.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. But looking away from perhaps the future of technology and looking back at its past, in some cases its distant past, Alex wanted to highlight two prominent brands that have seemingly reemerged from the dead, or at least from relative stasis here, and that's RCA and RadioShack. So Alex, why are we talking about RCA and RadioShack in the year of our Lord 2026?
I have no idea why we're talking about them, but we're just like walking around, and there's a lot of really extraneous booths here from brands that you don't necessarily expect, but really RadioShack for me and RCA, they represent like a pretty, it's interesting what they did in the past, but here they just had, there was like, I think the RCA booth had like a number of CRT televisions at it, and then the rest of it was like nothing. I think there was like a speaker or a boombox somewhere, and there was like nothing else.
I think they had some kind of charity going on.
There was a charity event, which I guess is nice. There's two dogs. Yeah, but it was just really funny to see them like right next to like at the same place as like AI robots punching each other or whatever. And then same thing with RadioShack, where I swear RadioShack went under at one point. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but just like legacy brands coming out, and I actually wonder why they got show floor space. But same thing. There was like Kodak there too. Like really legacy stuff where they're there, but they don't actually have a big impact on the modern markets. There was also a lot of other things that I tried out that I'm not really convinced on. I did try out AR glasses from, what is the name of the company? X-Real?
X-Real, I believe, yeah.
X-Real. It was, once again, kind of an avatar demo, just like the Project Ava, where I put on the glasses. You can't see this, unfortunately, right now, because it's an AR demo, but I put on some glasses and a very anime waifu.
Let's say a voluptuous figure.
Yeah, it's like, I really wish it wasn't that way, but an anime waifu was talking to me about the weather around me, and it was projected into a 3D space, stereoscopic vision.
Sure.
But
I'm familiar. I have stereoscopic vision myself.
Like you could like see your hands projected into it with a bit of lag. But what would it bring me? It was just like especially the avatar, because it had to like run using Unity, and you're like taking up all this like space running a 3D
Was
avatar.
it using Unity?
It was using Unity.
Oh,
yeah, it was using Unity. I saw it load up.
Yeah.
And I was like thinking like, man, I'm rendering this 3D avatar in my vision, takes up a huge portion of my vision. Like I thought it was so dumb. But I could imagine AR being useful in other contexts, but not for just like an avatar that's talking to me about like the weather and like how I get from point A to point B. Like I'd use my phone for that.
Also, I think there is a bit of a conflict here that's been brewing between the kind of pass-through AR glasses mentality and then something like the Vision Pro, right? The Apple Vision Pro, which uses pass-through cameras and has a much better field of view, right? Where you're really immersed in the content in that kind of VR headset.
It was pretty small. I think I could even see the projection of it, like how far it went out. It was pretty low FOV.
So I'm not really sure how you resolve that between the lightweight but not very capable kind of headset option and the thing that is basically the inverse of that, and obviously colossally expensive in the Vision Pro. I don't think either is ideal, but I almost think you kind of need both to really sell it to consumers as a mainstream everyday item, at least as something that you're going to actually use every day, and not just like a frivolity like a Quest 3 might be for the typical consumer, right? But something that was kind of a frivolity, but a very pleasant frivolity, was something that we actually saw at Intel. So Alex, why don't you walk us through what might be the most interesting Lego sculpture I've ever witnessed in my life?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of cool Lego in my life, like going to like Lego World, I think it's called, in Berlin. That's pretty cool. But this was made by engineers at Intel, where the Panther Lake SoC was brought out in something like, I swear it was like 42,000 separate Lego bricks. And it was organized in such a way to be a really well-made representation of the SoC, with each discrete block and its physical space blocked out with the exact same scale dimensions as the actual SoC itself. And it had like the pins on the back in the same mount and configuration as you would see on the real thing. You can see me holding it up here.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and it also had LEDs built into it that were plugged into a laptop running on it nearby. plugged into Task Manager. So for things like CPU and GPU, as well as, what else was maybe there? Oh yeah, CPU and GPU definitely, showing how much utilization was currently on the laptop by how much the LEDs were being lit up. And for the NPU, which Windows currently does not allow you to see its current utilization in the Task Manager, the engineers wrote a machine learning program to read the task manager and then spit that out and drive the LEDs with it, because they didn't actually have an API to plug that into. And that's was showing the amount of NPU usage, and they were driving the GPU at that moment to get it to such a high GPU utilization by showing the Lego brick program, the planning program of like a 3D model of the thing. It was so layered and complex.
It was lagging a bit.
It was like it was just like, this is like one of the craziest. This reminds me of like a lot when we saw Minecraft RTX the first time too. We saw like a really crazy demo of it running with like on like, I don't know, like a DJ pult. You know, it's like we saw like, you know, people. I love it when engineers do stuff with hardware and they plug it into software and they make it do crazy stuff. And this was like a passion project by a number of engineers. One of them who talked to us about it. It was just, you know, just crazy engineer stuff.
Yeah, the kind of stuff they're putting together here for what is ultimately just like kind of something in the corner of Intel's presentation here. It's pretty extraordinary, the amount of effort that actually goes into some of these CES presentations. And that's something that I feel like we sometimes ignore, is the immense amount of time and effort that goes into presenting what is basically like a little spectacle for the press.
And who knows how many people actually even noticed
care
it and
or
even
notice,
cared to notice it. But you know, he was lucky that he caught someone that thinks Lego's kind of fun.
And they were genuine Lego bricks, by the way. They were stamped with the Lego symbol.
And they were actually all orientated in the proper direction. They weren't like mixed in a way, so like everything was horizontal. That should be. It was very funny. You know, the details were immense. But we also saw some pretty interesting desks.
Yeah, I would say we saw some people who were locked in perhaps some different ways. So I just took notice of a few people who were in interesting kind of configurations here, interesting kind of physical configurations with respect to their virtual workspaces, with respect to their gaming setups. It's all very interesting here. We also saw a woman partaking in a massage chair. There were all kinds of very cyberpunk-esque massage chairs.
Okay, we didn't get, I don't know if we got footage of this, but there were massage chairs that looked like the bikes in like Akira or like Cyberpunk. I have no idea what the design was on that. This thing was hideous. I can't imagine putting it in your home. But yeah, and I'm pretty sure they were talking about how it was an AI-driven massage chair. I'm not mistaken.
Would you really want a massage chair that wasn't AI-driven, Alex?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, they had massage chairs for decades and decades without AI, so one can only imagine how much better they are now.
Oh, they got to be so good, especially when they look like some cyberpunk garbo.
Yeah, but I particularly took notice of this very locked-in kind of salaryman figure here, who was engaged in a kind of recumbent desk setup. Engaged what looks like some kind of
was it a CAD program or
software or something. I'm not exactly sure what the real world application of that is, but I think this is a very interesting and possibly maybe comfortable but not practical desk setup.
Depending upon how it could be angled or pushed towards you, it was maybe not close enough to actually appreciate what you're looking at without squinting or something. I mean, it's cool to see like semi-experimental design and people looking at ergonomics in a new way, and that should probably always be done to increase comfort. But this one, beyond the novelty, I can't imagine buying it.
Yeah, well, I can certainly imagine buying it, but I would imagine also immediately regretting it. To be honest with you. One last thing I wanted to touch on before Alex and I reflect on our trip more generally here, reflect on Vegas more generally, is a very cool hall, which was the South Hall at CES. Now, the other halls are perhaps more high-flying halls, more full of exciting products, more full of the kinds of products that would typically attract tech journalists like a moth to a flame, the kind of high-flying combat robotics demos that really do impress people. But I thought there were some interesting things in the South Hall. that I wanted to point out here. So first of all, there were a lot of accessories. So JSOX was there. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but they're a very interesting Switch 2 brand. They had some interesting Switch 2 products, which I've seen before and actually availed myself of a couple of them because I really do love my Switch 2 grips and cases. Right. They also had a mock-up of a Steam machine, which is the only kind of mention or use of the Steam machine we saw at the show.
That was literally it. I mean, we talked to people about it because we're interested in it, and everyone's just like,
everyone's talking about it.
Yeah,
I actually saw a Valve engineer at the show just walking past me. That I also met her at the Valve event I attended back in October of last year. But I did not actually see any physical Steam machines except for this mock-up with some kind of a vinyl decal on the front, perhaps, or some kind of. I suppose in this case the faceplates are kind of replaceable, so maybe it's one of those.
Yeah, right.
But that is basically just a just a kind of minor frivolity there. But we also saw a very interesting thing, which is they have these pavilions. I believe there was a Korean pavilion and a China pavilion, and they're
Thailand too.
And Thailand pavilion, and they were mainly Taiwan.
Everything.
They were mainly marketed towards, I think, kind of business to business or ODM kinds of sales. So you walk through and there are people promoting heat sinks. There are all kinds of companies that don't exactly have names that roll off the tongue or are suited for Western audiences, like Guangzhou Baiyu Electronic Co. Limited. Very interesting places. But this is actually, I think, a place where a lot of other businesses are going, a lot of the other vendors are going. Perhaps the Razors of the world at some point are going to these vendors and are saying, hey, we want to build this product. What can you give me for this component? Or even what can you do for me if I wanted a design for a custom, semi-custom component? So this is actually a pretty interesting view into the world, perhaps which is underappreciated, which is actually the world of these kind of unsung heroes that are actually working in places like Shenzhen to actually deliver these products to the end consumer.
Yeah, it was also interesting because we're journalists walking through it, and they're still trying to talk to us because they don't know that, and they're like trying to talk to us, trying to sell us their like little adapter for a battery or something, or like some sort of power tool configuration, or we even saw stuff like non-standard electronic toothbrushes, and it was just like it's just like totally crazy stuff that we have no bearing of interest in, but they all want to sell it to us. And it was a little lonely back there too. There weren't that many people.
It was lonely, and that South Hall was absolutely massive. I have some footage of it here. You can see me panning from one end of the South Hall to the other end of the South Hall, and it is. I mean, it's insane. It's got to be like 1 or 2 kilometers.
Yeah, it was more than a kilometer across.
More than a kilometer across.
Pretty big. Yeah.
I mean, after Alex and I were walking around the CES show floor for a few hours, it was very tiring, and certainly by the end of that South Hall trek, I was pretty tuckered out.
At least it wasn't too loud.
At least it wasn't too loud. The South Hall was a little bit quieter. Again, that kind of business-to-business focus. There are fewer business customers than there are consumers in this world, so it was a little bit quieter, a little bit more sedate here. But Alex, I think we should also reflect on our favorite city in the world, which is Las Vegas. The site of the Consumer Electronics Show, obviously this was a very exciting time for us. Last year we came away with some mixed impressions of the hotel we were at, which is the Fontainebleau, which is I think one of Vegas's newest major hotels, if not its newest major hotel. This year we were staying at the Venetian, which is a little bit more classic. I think it was opened up in the late 90s, but perhaps tacky in its own ways or its own unique ways.
It's very tacky.
What do you make of the Venetian, and what do you make of your stay in Vegas this summer?
I mean, it's very nice to be here in the aspect of I really love CES, meeting people.
Super fun.
People who are interested in technology just like we are, and also meeting with engineers. Meeting with Tom Peterson was a lovely thing. All of the Intel presentation and their honesty was really well done. Wonderfully spacious room and everything like that. Yeah. But at the same time, it's hard to escape how much high pressure and how much money driven this city is. So like everywhere you go, you're paying for everything. Like there's not like great public transport.
Very car-centric.
Very car-centric. A lot of yelling, too. Like when
screaming.
People are in there screaming, like oh my gosh, the screaming that we heard and stuff like that all over the place of people just trying to get on their way and screaming to get on their way. So it's like super high pressure, and I'm just not a fan of the city. I almost wish I remember I was talking with Corey from My Life in Gaming, also works for us with DF for the Super Show, saying that he went, I think, to his first CES in 1993 in Chicago.
Wow.
When there was a summer CES. And I could imagine visiting Chicago could be really interesting.
Sure.
more so than Las Vegas. So that was
pizza.
definitely a thing. Yeah, the pizza. I could eat a pizza there. So it's just like just like not my style of city, but I do really like all the people I met here. Talked to some cool people, even just like randomly like Jeff Keighley and stuff. It's like,
Oh,
wow,
yeah.
and Ed Boon.
Ed Boon?
Yeah. And it's like, whoa, cool. And in general, I don't know. I think we should what's your opinion on Las Vegas?
Well, I love the show.
Okay.
I love to be here. I loved being here last year, and I feel like this year we were even better prepared, more on top of things, some more interesting stuff, even though the show itself was perhaps a little lower profile, again, because we did not have a major new PC
Like
desktop
Blackwell
hardware
or
launch.
whatever.
Blackwell was obviously a huge hardware launch. Did see some interesting things from the various vendors, but it was a little bit of a lower profile show. But in general, Vegas, not really my cup of tea. Obviously, Vegas has its various forms of entertainment and vices, and perhaps those are not my own entertainment and vices.
Yeah, I
I
don't
suspect
gamble,
that's the same.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's the same issue with Alex there as well. But I would say that I generally appreciated the hospitality. I thought people were very nice. I thought the show was great. Really enjoyed CES, enjoyed seeing all the different kinds of technology. I mean, it brings people from all over the world. You know, it is a massive show. Europe, Asia, Africa, everywhere, Antarctica probably. It was crazy. And I met so many interesting people there, had so many nice dinners, saw so many fans, saw so many people who were, you know, just walking by and seeing Jim Keller, of all people.
Oh yeah, just
holding
over.
court in the middle of the Venetian Hotel. I mean, that's crazy. All kinds of people like that. So that was really cool. Various executives rubbing shoulders with people. I mean, it's just a dream in terms of the level of access and the level of stuff you're seeing and the constant barrage of new things. I mean, it's really an extraordinary experience. It's an overwhelming experience, an overstimulating experience, but maybe that's just Vegas for you, and maybe that's just CES for you.
Yeah, it could be that. But like, I don't know. What would you say overall, like your CES experience? Really positive? What was your favorite thing, maybe?
I feel really positive about it. I have to say my number one, although I am retreading some territory here, so forgive me for this one. But my number one was probably seeing that robot fight, to be honest with you. Like, that was just incredible. That just blew me away. That's something that I didn't see last year, and I couldn't have seen last year because the technology was not good enough last year.
Yeah,
okay?
right.
And that's something that, I mean, I've seen a couple videos where robots are fighting with people and being kicked around from like the last couple months. This is a new development. This is a relatively new development that robots have been this limber, this athletic, this coordinated, dealing with people. Obviously, machine learning is implicated in this. All kinds of fields are implicated in this. Really impressive stuff. And, you know, I mean, obviously, the movie RoboCop is perhaps a cautionary tale as to what can go wrong in this instance, or, you know, I mean, there are plenty of examples in popular fiction that will tell you why this is an unwise idea.
Yeah.
But at least for now, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting looking now. For me, my favorite aspect was something we didn't actually talk about today, but was actually in the Tom Peterson interview, which should be out by the time this direct comes out, of
I
course.
believe so, yeah.
And that was Tom and Intel saying, hey, before advanced shader delivery comes online from Microsoft, we're going to be shipping
butlering?
We're going to be shader butlering for the user.
Yeah.
We're going to be shipping shaders to you through a service running in our driver. So you can play games on first startup with better shader compilation performance and less stutter and all these things. And I didn't even know that was going to be happening in that aspect. And it's kind of something I've joked about and laughed about over the years. And hey, they're doing it. So Intel's going to be first to market with some really, I actually think some really advantageous user experience stuff there. Yeah.
All right, Alex, that's enough reflecting on CES. I want you to reflect on something much more important than CES, which is RAM prices.
Yeah.
RAM prices. Now, we had a couple of questions on RAM prices because obviously RAM prices are motivating a lot of this discussion about, like, can Valve launch the Steam machine for a price that's not going to put me out of business? Can these products actually hit the market with a price that consumers are willing and able to bear? And that's exactly what Pesky has asked, essentially. Very interesting name. Hi, DF team, with the current dilemma about foundry resources, which affects all sorts of RAM right now, how does this bode for new tech that was shown at CES? For example, Nvidia Ace and DLSS 4.5 with increased VRAM usage.
Well, all right, to say the least, it does, as soon as in software, VRAM requirements, I wouldn't say actually VRAM requirements, but as soon as there are more capabilities to turn up how much VRAM is being utilized, it does seem like it is standing in the way of the fact that right now RAM prices are going to be increasing across the board for the industry. We have yet to see how that'll be affecting GPUs directly,
Right.
but that will probably be happening in the future. So that is the truth of it, and Pesky here points it out. But at the same time, things such as DLSS 4.5 and Nvidia Ace, which is basically shipping in almost no products at the moment, are very completely optional technologies. And one of the beauties of at least PC gaming is that you can turn things on and off depending upon your hardware level. So I really don't think DLSS 4.5's increased VRAM usage, if that is a thing, I have to measure that myself. It would be getting in the way of performance in games, but one of the great things is you could just turn it off or use a different DLSS preset if that is a thing. So, and just don't play a game with Ace. Right now, like, that's one of the great things about PC is I actually like it when they allow you to turn up the graphics, even if it only affects a small subset of users, because that's kind of what PC's always allowed you to do, and you get a glimpse at the future that way. So I'm completely fine with this. I don't see it as a big problem.
Yeah, I think to me, there's a certain question about exactly how RAM heavy are these new technologies. Because when you look at something like DLSS 4.5, I mean, it is meaningfully more RAM hungry, but does it matter a whole lot in most titles? I'd say probably not, right, Alex?
I mean, it really depends on what you're
Really
pushing.
depends, okay.
Yeah, but like,
That's
just because if you're on like a 12 gigabyte GPU and you're already like in like Indiana Jones,
Right.
with like path tracing on, like maybe it could push you over the edge, but that's also like a smaller scenario. It's not a high percentage scenario. So I don't know. I still think this requires more testing, but I also just think you can just turn a different setting on.
Alex has raised a very good objection. No, Alex is completely correct here. But I'd also say, like, with regards to like the A stuff and the AI stuff, you know, these models are getting better all the time. They're getting slimmer all the time. They're fitting into reduced memory footprints all the time. And indeed, if you're trying to ship a game with, like, let's say, you know, some autonomous AI nonsense as a fundamental feature, you're going to be fitting that into 8 gigabytes of VRAM. I'm just going to say, like, to target a reasonable audience. I mean, right now, you know, 8 gigabytes of VRAM cards are everywhere. Computers with relatively low memory capacities are everywhere. People will try to accommodate you for a long time to come.
Yeah,
right. I think that's probably the expectation here. Another question on similar grounds from Kate. With ever-increasing RAM prices, which is shifting to price increases for almost all major PC components, alongside games being more expensive and taking years to develop, layoffs, and the cost of living crisis? Okay, that's a lot of different points there.
Yeah, it is a lot, yeah.
Are we reaching an inflection point where the current focus of pushing maximum fidelity becomes no longer sustainable? Don't get me wrong, I think the latest gaming technologies like ray tracing are incredible, but I can't help but think if we should shift the focus somewhat more towards performance and scalability on more inexpensive hardware. Now, I do take a little bit of offense, a little bit of an objection to the idea that ray tracing is one of the latest gaming technologies. I think it's actually a pretty aged gaming technology at this point, at least in its hardware accelerated form. But what do you make of that question, Alex? Should we focus less on fidelity and more on frame rate and lower budget hardware?
Well, I think the amount of games that are produced each year that are only fidelity chasers is actually a pretty small portion of all games produced. So I don't think it's actually like an industry sickness or something like that, in that it's affecting everything. You know, like a lot of my favorite games don't have very good graphics at all.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And even new releases don't have the best graphics at all. I would also say that ray tracing, for example, is technically not one of the biggest sinks in terms of what is making games so expensive. Rather, it is asset production and iteration over assets. Like, you have to employ so many artists working really hard to make all these very beautiful, high density geometry and textures and scenarios in games. And that is a very expensive thing to do. And that's where I really think if that is one of the biggest things that is making games so much more expensive, then it's fine if games don't have such high quality textures or as diverse worlds. And if games are actually a bit smaller in that regard, I actually don't mind that at all. I'm pretty fine with that. If it does become such a big deal for so many games. So I would say I don't think ray tracing is a problem in this equation. We've also seen really recently that a lot of games that I actually don't think this is such a big problem overall, because we've seen a lot of games now that are actually beyond some UE5 really problematic titles. We've seen a lot of titles also that scale surprisingly low. Like we just saw Battlefield 6, we saw Arc Raiders, we saw Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 this year. We're seeing games that are now being stripped back to run on Switch 2 and handheld PCs with a degree of grace. So I think actually we're seeing a greater scalability across hardware than we've seen in the past for a long time now. There was a point, and I've covered this before in many DF retro PC videos, where I say like you couldn't have a PC that was 3 years old and run a game. It would just literally wouldn't run, or it would run so poorly that you wouldn't consider it a playable experience. And nowadays, I've shown it many times before, you can have an RTX 2060 base model and still play a game at 60 FPS.
Yeah.
That's something that wasn't there in the past, and that's a very old GPU now. So I would say our scalability is higher than it's ever been before, and maybe that's also expensive to actually ensure for titles, that level of optimization.
This might be a little bit controversial here, but I actually take a little bit of an objection to this question and its framing, because like you said, we have such extraordinary scalability in software now. And even titles like Doom, which do show off ray tracing, have very good RTGI, they scale very well. They scale all the way down to a Steam Deck just fine. I mean, it might not be the most perfect experience in the world, but at least you're playing it at a playable 30 FPS on a Steam Deck. Maybe there is a conflict in the sense that you need a certain baseline capability to just run a ray tracing workload, right? And that will only extend to cards that are produced realistically, I guess past 2020 for AMD hardware.
For AMD.
For AMD, but obviously going back to 2018 for Nvidia hardware, that's a really long span of time. And even still, that's discounting software ray tracing, which will run just fine potentially on a card like a 5700 or something.
Or
right?
GTX 1080 and 1080 or 1080 Ti.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure that I necessarily agree with this question.
I just think the ray tracing part of it is just like
it's kind of a non sequitur. It doesn't
really fit into it. But like I do think the aspect of like games having like so many assets and so many artists and going for years to produce these worlds.
Sure, yeah. This is such a thorny question.
Yeah, it's a very thorny one, but
question.
I think it's not the problem necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think ray tracing is necessarily the problem. It might be emblematic of a certain approach, but it's not, I don't think ray tracing is necessarily the problem. It could be part of the solution.
Yeah, it could for some titles, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we have the very provocatively named user, Alex's Ray Traced Bottom. He's asking a question about Reflex 2. It's been a year since Nvidia announced Reflex 2, with frame generation now scaling up to 6x and input lag creeping higher. I expected Reflex 2 to become a major piece of the frame generation pipeline. Now, I would contest that input lag is creeping that much higher. As you've seen in some demos, it's actually a very small amount higher than the 4x frame generation in DLSS 4. During your CES adventures, were there any whispers or behind-the-scenes demos showing more of Reflex 2? Now, I believe we saw Reflex 2 in its first incarnation last year at CES. We saw a demo of it in the finals. Is that correct, Alex?
It was in the finals.
We've not seen any subsequent demos or developments, at least to my knowledge. Maybe you can inform me otherwise.
I haven't seen anything about it. Okay, so I would imagine, I didn't actually ask NVIDIA because I forgot about Reflex 2. I actually just completely
forgot.
There's a lot of stuff I'm trying to
A lot of people have forgotten about Reflex 2.
Yeah, I guess NVIDIA maybe did too. But if I were to guess, and this is just based upon what Tom Peterson said, who works at Intel and has nothing to do with NVIDIA right now, but he described the problem as a thorny one that is hard to get right. Mm-hmm. And maybe what we saw in the finals worked fine enough in the finals, but maybe, and we only saw it in like one area of the game, but maybe it actually is causing other issues. Like maybe it doesn't actually work with frame gen and they want it to work with frame gen before they ship it. Or maybe it doesn't work well with some other aspect of something that I can't consider right now at this late hour. But at the moment, we didn't hear anything about it. I would really like to see more of it. It seems like it is eminently doable based upon the fact that it is based upon things that are already kind of done in the VR context.
Right.
So it seems like it is doable.
Asynchronous time warp.
Asynchronous time warp and such. But I feel like we didn't see it. and maybe we'll see it this year, but the fact that we didn't is actually kind of surprising.
And it's also weird that Nvidia would promote a technology that they're not intent on following up on, because I really feel like when Nvidia launches a new PC technology these days, they kind of tend to stick the landing with a wide number of titles.
They at least bring it out well enough usually.
Yeah.
So this is like one of those.
It's not like a paper launch.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, like it wasn't a paper launch of software or something like that. It just literally never materialized. I think there was something like where people were somehow enabling it in Arc Raiders at one point. I may be wrong about that. I'm sorry, but I think at the moment it's not there, and it's actually a big shame because it would be cool to see it and test it in person again.
We have another question, and this is not a CES related question, but it is a very important question, because Alex and I have been on the trail of chasing down these really exciting Switch 2 releases. We took a look at Star Wars Outlaws, we took a look at AC Shadows on Switch 2, very exciting releases. We did a dual multicam video on Layers of Fear.
Right.
And we have another Unreal Engine 5 title coming up, which is Ark Survival Ascended. And Tagan86 asks, Happy New Year's, gents, and God fortsättning, as we say in Sweden.
Fortsättning?
Yeah, Alex is better at that than I am. As we say in Sweden, what are your thoughts on the recent interview with the Ark dev stating that Nintendo Switch 2 port of Ark Survival Ascended is only doable with UE 5.7, and that they may need to use frame generation to achieve 30 FPS. Do you think that the combination of UE 5.7 and FSR, parenthetically FSR, frame gen, will bring Nanite and Lumen to more Switch 2 titles in the future? Is it possible that we may see a Switch-only version of DLSS frame gen? Now, this is a tricky interview. This is quite a contentious interview, because basically the developers are saying that UE 5.7 has brought them a big increase. I think it's like a 30 or 40% increase in terms of frame rate over the prior version of UE that they were running with their game. They mentioned wanting to bring their game to Switch 2. Obviously, that helps facilitate that effort. But they've also mentioned wanting to bring along that signature system. So your Lumen, your Nanite. I think they said VSM might be dropped. That's perhaps something they could do for a Switch 2 port. But they wanted to bring over its essential systems, which is fair enough. Obviously, it's a UE 5 game. But in order to do so, they were mentioning that they were not actually hitting a stable 30 FPS, even with all those optimizations and presumably some aggressive DRS behavior and other optimizations. They were only getting the game to about 20 FPS. So they said, perhaps we could do frame gen to 30 FPS, which would obviously imply a base frame rate of 15 FPS. Again, presuming it's a 2x frame gen. Maybe they were contemplating 3x or 4x frame generation, or perhaps even 6x frame generation at this point. Who knows? But I guess there are a couple questions here. I think the first question is this at all advisable, and would you think that this is even something that a developer should consider in the most extreme scenario? Could there be a situation where frame jetting to 30 FPS is reasonable for a modern game in the year of our Lord 2026, or indeed 2027, or whenever this port happens to arrive? And then the second question is, exactly what would you do on Switch 2 with this? Because Switch 2 is Ampere-based, so you'd presume the library for DLSS frame generation wouldn't work on it, because it's been, it works on ADA, obviously it works on Blackwell, not really written for Ampere. So would you use FSR frame generation? This user has kind of a couple questions there. So what's your response to that, Alex?
Well, I think this interview is really weird in general. Reading it over,
bizarre.
I was a little mystified by some answers and some explanations. So it is. Good interview, though. Great interview. The person conducting the interview was really great. So that's wonderful. But I don't think it's ever advisable to bring up a game running sub 30 up to 30 using frame gen, because it implicitly implies that, or even explicitly requires that the game run at 15 FPS internally.
Right.
And that would be absolutely atrocious from an input latency level. That would be completely unplayable input latency. Right. And it would also be visually probably extremely poor, other than straight movements sideways and forward.
Right.
But that's not how we play games. 3D viewport, whatever. Yeah. So no, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And it's a little bit weird that they would even say that they would consider it. And also, there was some implication there that I think that they were asking Nvidia and Nintendo whether or not DLSS FG would work on Switch.
Kind of a weird attitude from a game developer, basically publicly pleading that a system holder and a prominent hardware vendor make some accommodation for you in your game so you can possibly abuse frame generation.
Yeah, I don't think they'd want people to be playing that. I don't think Nvidia would say we should allow you to use it to get up to 30 FPS. And I don't think at the moment there's a version of FrameGen running on them. And I also wouldn't expect it to be the case because then it would open up the fact that you should easily be able to run FG, a version of DLSS FG on Ampere, and I don't think Nvidia has their interest, even though I think that would be great for a consumer perspective. I don't think that's realistic that Nvidia would do it, considering I've asked them multiple times in the past, like when I talked to Brian Catanzaro, I was like, why can't we run this on Ampere? And he, he gave an answer.
It doesn't require the optical flow hardware.
It doesn't require it anymore, so if they did do it, it would be FSR, I think, or just something even more simplistic, because we've seen LSFG, lossless scaling FG, and that's cheaper than FSR, and it's less effective, obviously, which I also wouldn't want to see running. This shouldn't be done.
Right. It's Frankenstein's monster. We've created a monster with frame generation. It reminds me of the famous warning, the horrible warning that Alex saw when he booted up the Monster Hunter Wilds benchmark for the first time. Please use frame generation, Capcom pleaded, and Alex declined their invitation into his to his detriment, because obviously he was cursed with very poor performance in that game.
Not good enough.
Yeah. But in this case, I think it would be even more glaring because, 30 FPS frame generation, you got to give me a break with that one. And I thought the tone of this interview was very interesting. I'm certain. I guess I should caveat that with, of course, it's a great thing when developers are open and honest, especially about their development process, especially on a game that is in development, a port that might not even go forward. Who knows what will happen with it? I think that's cool. But I also, I could never really contemplate frame generating to 30 FPS. Frame generating to 60 FPS from 30 FPS is also a pretty dicey
It's
proposition.
also a huge stretch. Like, you probably shouldn't do that either.
Exactly.
Almost 90% of the time, you should never do that. So
Exactly. So I think this is just getting off on the wrong foot. I hope they reconsider, maybe even stripping out some of those more fundamental systems. Who knows? I know they did some of that for Series S. Perhaps they could consider doing that for Switch too.
Right.
Anyways, we've got another question here on the topic of some advanced technology and perhaps some deficits in GPU horsepower, but in an entirely different context, in the context of extremely fast refresh rates. It comes from Kurwa Bober.
I think it's pronounced differently, but it's a curse word.
Okay, I'll let that sit there. Bleep asks, do you all think monitors are improving faster than GPUs can keep up with? Samsung announced a 1040 Hz monitor, which seems asinine to me. In what scenario are you realistically going to be able to hit that frame rate without MFG, multi-frame generation, parenthetically, and also be able to actually take advantage of that difference? That's a bit of a interesting question, Alex, because I think the GPU hardware, but maybe more importantly the CPU hardware to drive those refresh rates isn't really there, at least with normal technology.
Yeah, I think it's not a question of GPUs because arguably
scalable.
Yeah, they're scalable. Yeah. You can turn a game down to a pittance, and you could probably most GPUs, unless there's some flat compute cost. Some games obviously do have that. Don't
Metal Gear Solid Delta.
Metal Gear Solid Delta. You've got also Assassin's Creed. The most recent one, Shadows, uses a lot of compute that doesn't scale over frame. So there are games that would do that, but you could actually get stuff like Doom. I almost imagine Doom, the Dark Ages, could start getting close to that. But it's just the CPU performance is just not there for 1000 hertz. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't want that to be something that people could enjoy, because in the future games are going to run better on better hardware, and it's cool to have these monitors. You can also use them for interesting use cases like blur busters, shader beam, CRT emulation technology. There's a lot of reasons why 1000 hertz is cool. You get better divisibility for VRR scenarios where you're using low frame rate compensation. There's a lot of reasons why 1000 hertz is interesting. Than just, even if it's not completely attainable right now in all configurations. And I think we should be also not so avoiding MFG. I do think there's a great place for MFG for those who want persistence, blur reduction, and smoothness increases. And yes, we'll talk about latency but I still think there's a place for that. I don't think we should just completely ignore it.
I think this kind of question, I mean, I think it's interesting, but I would attack it from almost a bit of a different angle, which is to say that it's kind of putting the cart before the horse a little bit. I'm not totally sure that the technology is there in the way that this user contemplates, because yes, there are 1040 hertz monitors. Unfortunately, Alex and I didn't see any of them. I don't think
I
we
didn't get
saw
to
any
see
of them.
one, no.
Perhaps we did see them glancingly, but we did not observe them, did not take notice of them, perhaps.
Yeah.
But those are dual mode monitors. They start with a base, I believe a base update of 500 hertz at 1440p, which is pretty high, but much lower, obviously, than that higher figure. And they go down to 720p, 1040 hertz, I believe, which is
that's quite
720p. I mean, we've moved well beyond that. That was a resolution that people were commonly enjoying back in the 20 years ago, perhaps.
Yeah.
That's not really a resolution that you really want to be contemplating for a modern PC game. With I would say with more reasonable high-end monitors, we're talking about 240 hertz, maybe 360 hertz.
Those are very reasonable.
With like 4K panels.
Comparatively.
Yeah, with like kind of the OLED panels, with the 4K panels, that's really where you want to be, I think. I don't really think you want to be in the realm of ultra-high refresh rates. And if you are in the realm of ultra-high refresh rates, I feel like that's a specific kind of customer who's enjoying their Counter-Strike Source.
Yeah.
Or enjoying their CSGO.
Yeah, especially the 720p figure where you read stuff about like these pros like doing stuff like running 4:3 resolutions and just like stuff that is like that's not how I game, but it's meant for a very niche user in general, and that's fine.
That's a very specific audience, and they play games with very specific requirements that happen to be low enough that they can accomplish this. So I kind of, and then on top of that, I'd also kind of just say, well, generally, ultra high refresh rates, Mafia the old country. Do you need it? No. That's kind of what I would say to that question. We have a couple of questions here to close out the show. A little bit more joking questions. Perhaps we could take them seriously or not seriously, depending on how the mood happens to strike us. Skyrim Fest 26 FPS edition. I don't know where that comes from. Perhaps that's the rim lag version of Skyrim. He asks, I was interested to hear in DF Direct 245 that Alex felt emotional playing Expedition 33. Parenthetically, no shame, Alex. I cried too. Very sad introduction for sure. Is the ultimate solution to StutterStruggle for devs to write a game with enough impact that players are unable to see the stutters through the tears. So is this an option that you think is appropriate for your gaming experience?
Just depressed me so much at a game's intro that I just can't feel it anymore. I can't feel the stutters anymore.
Yeah.
No, here, if you recall, when I did cover Expedition 33, I actually did talk about errant stutter that I found in it.
Sure.
It wasn't as bad. It wasn't nearly as bad as other Unreal Engine 5 titles, but I did still talk about it. So regardless of a game's quality or whatever, I think about it on a subjective level, emotional one. I'm pretty much always going to talk about it because it's kind of my signature and it's kind of the thing I care about as a technical reviewer.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I'd also say that in Expedition 33, it does stutter in some areas. I mean, obviously it has some traversal stutter in that opening, but actually throughout the game, I mean, I think it's a pretty good. Listen,
it's slower than another game.
It's not as bad as some other games on consoles, at least at 60 hertz flat. It's pretty fine. I mean, at least in my experience, I played a good chunk of the game on at least PS5 and Series X and PS5 Pro. I don't really think it's a gigantic issue, but certainly this could be a potential optimization solution. Perhaps Randy Pitchford is hoping that people are quite saddened by the state of his game. I don't know if that will ever improve. We actually saw Borderlands 4 running, I believe, on a laptop. It was running with very potato settings.
It was running on what had to have been very low settings. There was no brass.
I gotta say,
zero brass.
I prefer it Battlefield 6 to that. I think that might be a smarter call than perhaps one of the world's least well-equipped UE5 titles to run on a mobile silicon, on ultra portable silicon. Anyways, we've got one final question here, which is perhaps a similar kind of query, but for the provenance of AMD graphics hardware, which is, greetings, this is not facetious as I own one, but based on recent developments from Nvidia, why would anybody ever buy an AMD GPU now? Alex?
Well, I mean, one thing is, just because new tech is unveiled doesn't mean you have to immediately get FOMO and say like, why did I buy a Radeon GPU? Why, or something like that. Wait for reviews to come out. Wait for analyses, wait for user experience. We've already seen that people are putting question marks in front of DLSS 4.5, and we talked about it in this video already. And at the end of the day, just because someone else is maybe having a subjectively better or objectively better experience doesn't mean you can't have a great experience too, right? I think right now FSR 4 is excellent technology, and it passes what I would describe as more than good enough test. It's like it is subjectively great looking, even if there's aspects of DLSS 4 and 4.5 that may be better, right? There could be aspects that are worse that I've talked about. So, and yeah, at the end of the day, we want there's no reason to get such crazy FOMO just because the tech is unveiled. And I think there's meritorious reasons to get AMD. There's no of course there are. Yeah.
Yeah. I would kind of approach this question from maybe a slightly different angle, which is to say that I don't think AMD users should really be kind of jealous. I don't think they should really be covetous of the Nvidia technologies that are out there. Abusing some words today. I don't think they should really covet those Nvidia graphics technologies. I don't think they should really be looking at those technologies and saying, I need that. I think they should really be looking towards AMD, not necessarily for their competing technologies, because I do think they'll arrive, but more for the kind of continuity of service across the lifetime of those GPUs.
That's a good way to put it.
Because I do think AMD will be there. I mean, obviously they're there with FSR 4, but where are they with FSR 4 on a GPU you might have bought in 2023?
Right.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
They're not there on Strix Halo. They're not there on the ROG Xbox Ally Premium Extreme, whatever. Brand new graphics, brand new handheld. You paid $1,200 for, $1,100 for, $1,000 for.
That's a really good point.
It's not there. So it's certainly not there on cards from 2018. I mean, they were shipping Vega in 2018.
Oh my goodness.
The mainstream GPU. Nvidia was shipping Turing. Turing gets 4.5. Vega doesn't get driver. I mean, Vega barely gets driver updates. I mean, it's a completely different world.
That's a good point. I guess, when Nvidia brings out new technology, it shouldn't give you necessarily FOMO, but it should maybe bring into question how good the legacy support is on AMD, and maybe that's a better question actually to be asking, rather than why don't I also have MFG? Right?
Yeah. Now, speaking of legacy support, I think this video has gone on long enough that it has a legacy of its own. I think we're tipping the scales at well north of 2 hours here.
Oh my goodness.
It is quite late in the morning. It is 1:28 a.m. in Las Vegas. Hopefully our tiredness and delirious state has not rubbed off too badly on the state of this video, but perhaps this is an extra special DF Direct. We are indeed fueled by Red Bull and double shot Starbucks espresso cans. But Alex, I think we've had a really fun time here. I've really enjoyed my time in Las Vegas. I really enjoyed my time working with you. I've even enjoyed staying up recording this DF Direct with you. I think this has been a super fun trip. But Alex, I think that's probably enough for today. And from Alex and Oliver, auf Wiedersehen.